On one of the most ordinary days, before a battle, Jin Muin was looking pensively at the sun. After all, he was bored. Suddenly a spear whizzed by him, plunging straight into his enemy's chest. He flinched, realizing that for a moment he had allowed himself to be distracted. The guy's ally called him Jin Muin and asked, is he daydreaming in the middle of a massacre? Or is he tired already? The ally looked at him, perplexed as to why he was daydreaming in the midst of carnage. Perhaps he was tired, but Mu only grinned, not considering such thoughts worthy of a response. He drew his blade and rushed forward. Changwon looked at his friend and saw that he always had the same attitude. But Mu, after his start and the first blood spilled, was becoming a monster who was ready to fulfill his goal. He knew that the world called men like him Ronin. And when he became a mercenary, they called him Mercenary Ronin. Mu looked at his sword in a moment and said that name wouldn't last long. He realized there was a saying in the profession. Ronin mercenaries cannot leave this world until they enter the afterlife. And even after becoming a mercenary, it's very hard to leave. And yet today he's leaving this job, and he certainly doesn't plan on dying today. And as all people say, the most precious thing in this world is life. Woon turned to his friend and asked, how about drinking rice liquor afterward? Mu agreed and asked if he wanted to bet on who would fall first. Woon smiled, looking up at the white sky, and told his friend not to die. But Mu turned around and replied that he wasn't even planning on it. Running from both sides straight into the enemies, both shouted to each other not to leave their backs open. A few hours later, the sky had already darkened and Mu's sword stood in the ground. Raising his blade, he said that it was over, and it seemed to him that somehow he was bored to farewell. But suddenly he saw movement under the dead enemy. As he looked closer, he saw one emerge from the dead bodies, who can barely breathe. Mu ran up to him and yelled for his friend to wake up. What would he do if something happened to him? But looking at his hand, he saw that it was already in paint, and it was the paint of his very best friend. Putting him on the ground, Woong only said Seowa's name. Mu looked at his face and seeing his eyes open said with joy that he was awake. One immediately pulled a bag of money out of his pocket and gave it to his loyal ally. Woon was on his last breath, telling him to take care of his Seowa. Mu looked at his friend's dying body and couldn't do anything. Having done all the ceremony, he decided to bury his friend in the grave where all warriors are kept. And he even wrote his name on a board and chained it to the ground. Mu was very sad after burying his friend, and pouring a drink on his grave said that he always wanted to share with him. And just when he said he'd wash his hands of it all, and how dare he leave him alone, really, to finish the job. As he set out on his journey, he realized that he had one last task left. But should he accept it or even not? But he decided to look at his abilities and see if he could find her. After completing the task, Mu went to the town where his friend's daughter was supposed to live according to the information. But this town was so simple that people suffered from lack of money and wandered about in different alleys. Before the sun set, he looked around and said that this was the place. But soon he found a boy who knew who Seowa was. The boy was kind enough to walk him home and tell him that the woman he was looking for lived here. And now, as the Lord had promised him, let him pay 15 coins, as was in their agreement. But Mu was smarter than everyone else and said he would check out the house with his own eyes first. Entering the old house, he saw that it was almost empty, and all the dishes and furniture were scattered in different directions. But the bed was not empty, and at this moment there was a girl lying in it who was shocked at the intruder. The girl asked the stranger who he was. The boy ran up and replied that it was him. The girl was surprised and a little confused. Mu walked up to them and asked, her name is Seowa? And her last name is Chan? The girl said yes and asked in return, who is he? Yuk told his sister that he asked her name, and he led him from the entrance of the village. Seowa didn't know how to answer him with her name. She asked him if he had come to find her. Mu immediately sensed something wrong when they looked at each other. But Mu didn't reveal everything right away, and giving the guy the promise coins said that here was his payment. Left alone, Hua asked the stranger what business he had. Mu replied that he was a colleague who worked with her father, and he asked him as his last wish to find her. Hua asked with surprise, a last wish? And also her father's co-worker? And pretended that she had lost her father. But Mu saw her face and even believed her, for she moved to tears. Hua decided to put on a good act and cried, screaming that she had lost her father. Mu told her that she seemed to be out of it. Then maybe she would let him ask one thing. Hua raised her head and immediately tried to attack him and grab his sword. But Mu had foreseen this in advance and stepped aside. The girl didn't expect this, as her speed was considerably fast. Mu looked at her and said that she was so heartless. The girl realized that she had been exposed and immediately ran to attack and get rid of the guy. She tried various ways to reach him. Mu noticed that she had serious skill, and if she hit directly, even the stone would shatter. The girl didn't stop there and continued to attack with her nefarious and strange techniques. She used a downward falling technique for him, third speed. Mu didn't have time to dodge and was hit by a heavy blow. Leaning against the wall, he realized this was no joke. He thought maybe he should use his sword, but if he did that, the situation would change in the blink of an eye. But suddenly grabbing his sword, someone attacked him from behind that even destroyed the wall of the house. Mu didn't expect that, so he received a retaliatory attack that even caused him to fall to the ground. When he turned around, he saw that the boy and the old man had come. But the girl used this moment too, and with her technique, she attacked directly into Mu's back. Mu managed to turn around, but he couldn't even dodge the attack as he received a strong punch right in the chest. The old man told a girl named Chilsal that his skills were pretty rusty since he was wasting 3 seconds on a guy like that. Chilsal got angry and told him to shut up. Did he forget what would happen if he misbehaved in her presence? Mu slowly bled after her blow and remembered Woon asking him if it made sense. After all, could he make a difference and get information by being interrogated? Mu replied that yes, sometimes it can be better, because you can understand much better what the opponent knows and doesn't know. But to use this method properly, one prerequisite is needed. Woon asked, "What is it?" Mu replied that one must have strong stamina. When he opened his eyes, he immediately felt a strong blow to his chest. The girl walked up to him and said that this time she would ask, and he better get it right. Otherwise, there will be more. Mu replied that as he said, he was a colleague who shared life and death with Seowa's father, Jangwon, and when Jangwon was dying, he entrusted Seowa to him. And who are they that pretend to be Seowa and do this to him? The girl placed the knife under his neck and told him to be quiet, for they were the only ones asking questions here. The girl asked the guy how he knew she wasn't Seowa. Mu replied that she knew who he was, but the raider didn't recognize. But the old man started shouting that it was a lie. Chongwon had become a mercenary many years ago. In all that time, none of his colleagues had come to this village. He's never been here either, so it's also a lie that Seowa knows him. And then Mu realized that they were looking for Seowa too. The girl got tired of it all and started yelling for him to talk and tell him about himself and everything he knows. He must have clues about where to find Seowa. Mu replied that if he had something like that, would he be crazy enough to come here and do something like that? Mu slowly let go of the ropes and looked at the 2 enemies who were beating him for information. Mu said that it was time to call it a day. The old man and the girl were shocked by his abilities and even became afraid. Mu didn't waste any time and immediately ran up to the girl with all his speed and punched with all his strength that she even almost threw up. The old man used this moment to make his attack and save his life. But Mu had anticipated this in advance and turned around and dodged his attack and gave him a counterpunch to his stomach. The old man was completely beaten up already and thought that this was his intermediate skill, and thought it was a master level. But the girl also realized that this guy wasn't caught, and he let himself be caught. Mu approached her and said he was curious about something, but would she answer his question? And actually, he's not going to kill her, so he'll just let her go if she doesn't fight back. The girl replied that it was a useless act, let him kill her. Mu was surprised and asked if she wanted to die. The girl raised her eyes and started to insult him. But suddenly she felt even worse that it all made her head explode. Mu was surprised and didn't even understand how she had died. He didn't even have a hand on her. When he went outside, he decided to get out of the house and run away. But suddenly he saw a boy near the door. The boy at that moment was holding the weapon with which he had finished off the girl, and told the boy that he had caught him off guard. Mu replied that he says the same thing about him, and he cannot believe that there are people who kill their comrades so easily. Though life is cheap in their troubled times, but is it too much? The boy replied that he didn't know who was in front of him, but he would regret messing with them. Mu watched as the boy slowly died and thought hard, what is going on here? And why were the killers after his daughter? And now he would need more information to find Seowa. And extremely quickly, and if you think about it that way, who was in Loyang? That same night, the dead man scout came to his sect and told everything to his chief. The head asked with surprise, are all 3 dead? The scout replied that yes. Sal, Yuksal, and Chilsal, all of them. The head thought for a moment and told him that it looked like they had been taken by surprise. The servant replied that yes, it was assumed that he was quite a skilled warrior, and the person who was looking for Seowa was a tall young man. Other than that, nothing else had been confirmed. And it looks like he used his intermediate skill. The head thought and replied that however his techniques were simple, so it was difficult to determine the source of his martial arts. And what are his actions after that? The servant replied that after he left the slum, all traces were erased and they could not trace him further. The head said Savi, his subordinates couldn't even track him down. He's not an ordinary person. That might make things more complicated. But no, it's actually even a good thing. The servant then went to his men and ordered them to continue following him. Then he would lead them to Seowa. At this time, Mu arrived in Loyang at Sten Lu Tower, instead of where it is always beautiful and nature is in every corner of the city. Suddenly, the maid rushed into Mistress Ro's room. Madam asked, "Okay, what's the rush?" Okay, replied that a guest had arrived. The captain asked her to pass it on. And he said that when the lady saw it, Lady Ru would have something to say. And he also threatened that if he was refused on his doorstep, there would be endless repercussions. Mrs. Ro realized who her guest was and immediately went to the garden and met the guy. Mu told her that she had not seen him for a long time. Nanhyang looked at the guy and couldn't say anything back to him, for she was a little angry with him. Mu asked her why she was hiding her beautiful face under such an ugly mask. Did she get wrinkles or something? Nanhyang replied that she had worn it for so long that she had already forgotten it. Mu asked, then could she take it off? Nanhyang replied that she would refuse, and she doesn't care if she looks beautiful in front of him. Mu asked her with surprise, was it true? After all, he was greatly disappointed by it. He actually wanted to see Nanhyang's beautiful face. Hyang looked into his eyes and immediately felt love and warmth, and said that this is too much, and asked him why he looked even younger. Mu asked her if she was jealous. If yes, then she lost. But Hyang pushed him and replied that he was still as simple as before anyway. Hyang asked him what he had come to her for. She hadn't heard of any fights he might be interested in. Mu replied that that wasn't the point. He stopped fighting. Hyang was shocked and asked what did he mean, and did he stop being a mercenary? Mu replied that yes, he had one last contract to finish, that's why he came here. Hyang told him that he couldn't be a mercenary forever, right? So he still hasn't told her why he came to her? Mu didn't know how to tell her and decided to ask her to find him a job. Sitting down at the table, Mu said that he didn't want to get his hands dirty anymore, but he needed to make money and all he had learned was to be a mercenary. So there was nothing else he could do, meaning what he was saying with such a shameless face. Mu replied that the last contract he mentioned, he needed a quick buck. Hyang said that from the looks of it, it's related to Jangwon. Mu asked her and said that it was very important to him. Hyang thought about it and replied that it was not fair to make such a face. And actually one of the bodies just quit, so the spot is open. With his skills, it's not a problem, so she'll hire him. Mu jumped up from his chair and asked, really? As he hugged his mistress, he began to say that as expected, he was grateful to her. She was the only one he could rely on. Hyang pushed him and replied that she had 2 conditions to start with. Mu said he would do anything she asked as long as it wasn't death. Hyang said that, first of all, he must not touch their Kiryu courtesans. Mu was surprised, for his principle was not to stop women coming or going. But Mu said that he was not ready for such a thing. But Hyang got angry and replied that it was strictly forbidden for a bodyguard to touch a courtesan. Mu thought for a moment and said okay, he understood, so what other condition does she have? Hyang replied that it wasn't really a condition, but rather a request from her as an employer, and she wants him to investigate a murder case. Mu asked in surprise, a murder case? Wasn't he hired as a bodyguard? Hyang replied that yes, it's not exactly what Kiryu's bodyguard needs, but she thinks she can trust him with this case. And if he does it right, but Mu interrupted her and said he understood. He will take the case, but there is one thing he would like to ask in return. Couldn't she make part of the payment in advance? He has some pressing business to attend to. Hyang was surprised and asked, had he been given a terminal diagnosis or something? Mu asked her why she was talking about such a thing. Hyang replied that just by seeing him in such despair, she felt like she had never seen him like this before. Mu thought for a moment and replied that he could tell her that there was something to it. Hyang said that was right, and there must be a reason why he was going so far. Hyang didn't talk to him for long and threw the bag of money right into his hands, and said she'd consider it a down payment for an experienced bodyguard, and as soon as he has finished his urgent business, let him come back soon. Mu took the money and thanked her and replied that he would return soon. But Hyang saw that the thoughts about the wandering swordsman who had never been bound by anything had suddenly changed unexpectedly. At this time, everything was quiet in the local library. And the manager wasn't happy either because everything was quiet around him. But suddenly, he heard someone coming to see him. Mu came in and asked if Gang Sukcho was here, for it had been 5 years since they had seen each other in Sichuan. Suksu stood up in surprise and looked at the guy and said that it was him. But he couldn't stand it and started throwing books at him with anger. Mu expected such a greeting and dodged and said that he was happy to see him too. But Suksu didn't stop at that and attacked him. Suksu continued to land the strongest blows and couldn't even stop. But Mu just defended himself and didn't respond. But Su didn't stop at just that and continued to fight him. But Mu did not call him to do so and stopped with his attack. Su suddenly decided to speak up and said that he thought Mu was dead because he lost contact 6 months ago in Qinghai province. But Mu replied that if he died, did he know how many women would follow him to the grave? So even if he wanted to die, he couldn't. Su started laughing and said that he thought only his looks were the same. But his stupidity is still the same too. Sitting down at the table, Su asked him how he knew he was here. Mu replied that he had once heard from Guak Sam about him and Nan Hyang. Su was surprised and asked, did he go to see her? Mu replied that yes, he even got a job as a bodyguard at Nan Hyang's brothel. Su lost his temper and slapped his hand on the table, saying that after what he had done, how dare he go to her? And he got a job. Mu asked him to calm down, and that was all in the past. It's not like he forced her, it was a mutually beneficial agreement. Su calmed down and said that Nan Hyang must have her own reasons for accepting him. What a stubborn man he is. But Su suspected and asked the guy that he didn't come to Nakyang for him, did he? What kind of bloodshed was he planning? Mu pulled out his sword and replied that he was retired. Su didn't believe him and asked again, retirement? The boy replied that it was correct, but Su started laughing and said it was a good joke. He can't believe that Mu has retired. Mu replied that he didn't even expect the old man to be able to believe him, but Mu decided to get straight to the point and said that there were 2 things he was looking for. The first is a girl named Seowa, and the second is the identity of those who are after her. Su thought and asked again, a girl named Seowa? And what is he looking for a child for? Mu thought after his question and immediately remembered all the moments before his friend's death. The guy replied to Su that she was the daughter of his co-worker, Chong Woon, who died 6 months ago in Qinghai, and he asked him to give her his last words and, if possible, to take care of her. This is his last request, his last assignment. Su said he understood about it, but who is after it? Mu pointed and replied that it's not the regular guys. They're the kind of guys who use it. Su took a closer look and asked with surprised eyes, is this Ho Hongak? Mu replied that they were from the guys who attacked him. And one of them had used Seo Hu as bait to lure him. He was quite skillful. But for some reason, they were desperate to find Seowa, and now he has to find her before they do. And to do that, he needs to know who they are. Su replied that to use Ho Hongak, while still skillful, they are of course also dangerous. He does not care what happens to him, but if he wants to know his opinion, though it actually looks bad if he really is retired like he said, then ignoring it is the best option. Mu told him he was right, but remembering those moments showed him that he was the only one in Nokian who could give him information about them. Su replied to the guy asking him to find the daughter of his dead co-worker. And it looks like he's lived too long. And now he could consider that he was being repaid the debt he owed him 8 years ago in the Heiseo corridor. And he decided that he would help him. Mu got excited and said that he knew he could count on him. But Su replied that he didn't seem to say he'd do it for free. Mu turned around and said what is there to talk about money when he is returning a favor? Su replied that he wouldn't have agreed to this request if it wasn't for the favor. The guy turned around and said that he already knew that Su would say that. So he received an advance from Nan Hyan. Would that be enough? Su took it all in and replied that the job and the advance, the guy sure is the bomb. He will definitely work off that money. Mu turned around after his words and left saying that he would wait. After that, he went to Hyang and asked what was the incident. Hyang replied that there had been a murder 3 days ago. Yang Do-gun, the son of a Nakyang aristocrat, and a courtesan named Heban were murdered in a brothel called Songgakru. Immediately, the suspect, a young nobleman named Young Meng, was apprehended. He was standing at the scene of the crime, holding a bloody knife. And the problem now is that he doesn't remember anything. This suspect Young Meng is the son of his sworn sister who died 3 years ago. He and his sister Seol are to her as niece and nephew. He and Seol know that Zhongmen would never kill anyone. She fell to her knees before her and begged her to uncover the truth and find the real killer. She could do it, couldn't she? After that conversation, Mu headed to Mordbin Kendok's office. He asked if they had received a message from Juzil, and now he had a bodyguard in front of him investigating the case. The server replied that yes and let the gentleman hurry up. After all, the police are very unhappy about the case. Mu told him not to worry. Mu got to work and said he'd be done soon. He opened the body and began to look at it in detail. The servant was shocked, for he couldn't watch him touch the corpses and inspect him so carelessly. And are all mercenaries like that? Mu took a good look around and in a moment he noticed something, and said that the man was done and now he wished to examine the woman. The servant was greatly surprised and asked the guy, was he going to do a woman too? Mu replied that of course. They have 2 victims, he can't investigate only one of them. But they usually only do a cursory examination. And that's why no one trusts the authorities to investigate. Suddenly Mu noticed something. As the police suddenly rushed in and asked who dared to touch the body without permission, the servant was immediately frightened and replied that he didn't know anything. The police came up to the boy and grabbed him by the arm and asked him what he was doing without the permission of the authorities. But Mu was ready for anything. Feeling another's hand on his own, he immediately grabbed it and flipped it over. But Mu didn't talk to them for long, and punching both of them, he threw them right out the door. At that moment, another worker was standing outside the door, and seeing his friends all lying on the ground, started to panic. Suddenly, he felt someone behind him and turning around asked the guy, how dare he attack an official? Mu lowered his head and immediately realized that this person was the police chief's man, named Yuk-ji. Ji asked the others, what are they all doing? Have them stand up immediately and arrest this guy. Mu came up and said that he was apologizing and did not know that they were representatives of the court. He introduced himself and said that he was the bodyguard of Mrs. Su Ong-ru, a courtesan. Ji asked with surprise, Su Ong-ru? Is he her bodyguard? But he had never seen his face. Mu replied that he had recently become her bodyguard, and the lady told him to give her regards. Ji asked with surprise, is that so? Mu thought it was embarrassing, and if he mistreated him here and upset Han, there might be a problem with the monthly payments. And now then he decided that he would use her influence here. He said he was investigating this murder case on Mrs. Ru's orders, and he is ordered to investigate the incident quickly and thoroughly. And according to the order, he must examine the body before it decomposes further. Ji replied that there is the same procedure. Mu asked him if he was sure about it. If the inspection drags on and interferes with the investigation, Mrs. Ru will be extremely unhappy. Ji thought for a moment and told him to do what he wanted. Mu turned around and immediately began to look around. Mu pulled out his sword and said that if it was too disturbing, it was best not to look. He would proceed with the autopsy. Mu cut open one body and suddenly found a ring that was so bright and familiar. The next day, Guy came with Mrs. Ru and said that he was asking for forgiveness. Mrs. Ru replied that no, it was his fault that she did not warn them in advance. The defendant who is suspected of the crime is like a nephew to her. It's not that she doesn't trust the judicial investigation, but she assumes he shares her desire for a speedy resolution to this case. And Warrior Jean is actually a very capable person. He will conduct a fair and quick investigation, so it's better to cooperate with him, and immediately handed him a bag of gold coins. Guy replied, that's right. He would ensure full cooperation with the investigation. After a difficult conversation, Hyang was very tired and told the guy to come into the room. Mu walked over and asked my lady what was the matter. Is she going to reward her skillful bodyguard? Hyang punched him and said that she told him not to cause trouble. And he just recently became a bodyguard and he's already causing trouble? But luckily it was only Yuk-ji's men. If it was other officials, he would have been arrested on the spot. Mu replied that they started it. Hyang told him that he was asking him to behave like he used to. She has a reputation for owning the best brothel in Loyang. Hyang decided to cut to the chase and asked if he had learned anything from the autopsy. Mu replied that of course he had learned, but he thinks he needs to investigate further. It's too early to say anything right now. Did Hyang tell him not to say that he's doing this to pique her interest? And we'll call young man right now. Mu replied that there was no need, they would do that later. He needs to inspect the crime scene first, he can count on that. Hyang replied that Lady Wu was also a member of the Luoyan Courtesans Guild, so it wouldn't be difficult. Mu agreed and offered to visit her right away. And she needn't worry, it wouldn't take long. Suddenly, Ok's son came out to them in the street and said that she was here on behalf of Mrs. Ru. Mu was greatly shocked and thought that this person was a concubine at Zhang Wun's place. He didn't expect much from a brothel like this, but she's amazing. And especially her figure. Sun said she got a message from Nan Hyang, but is there something else to investigate? Mu replied that yes, everything is there. After all, this case involves a man who is like a nephew to her, and he thinks that Mrs. Ro wants to do her best. Sun replied that yes, she understood. But the scene had been completely renovated, the furniture, fixtures, and even the wallpaper had been replaced, and the stuff was thrown in the incinerator. But since it's not garbage day, they must be there. Suddenly, Mu saw that her gait seemed familiar. Sun suddenly turned around and asked, is something wrong? Mu replied that he wasn't. And really just Lady OK is so adorable that he couldn't help but be mesmerized. And so, first he would like to examine the room where the accused and the Confucian scholars were partying and the scene of the crime. And afterward he wants to talk to the courtesans and the slegs who accompanied them. But Mu was looking around and searching for something. No Sun pulled her gaze away slightly and looked at him strangely. When he met the courtesans, he personally looked at them and appreciated their physique and jewelry. But next they came to a room and the girl said it was the room where He Bong lived. Mu looked and asked what was behind the side door. The courtesan replied that it was an emergency exit. Mu went out to look and looked around and realized and thought that there must be a reason why the woman chose such a remote room. And if he were here, Mu put all the momentum of the attack in front of him and how he would act and move in this case. He had picked up on the fact that the assassin was far from the center staircase, so it was possible to know in advance that someone was coming from that direction. But making a mock-up of the attack in front of him, he surmised that the killer could have attacked from the front door, and that gives them time to prepare for an enemy attack. And after dealing with the surprise attack, they can easily escape through the emergency exit and window. Mu has looked around and thought of everything, and now the only thing left to do was to check it out. At this moment, Girl's son was looking at him through the window. At the time, there was a hostage in the prison who was chained to a chair and was a murder suspect. Mu came to him and told him that the guy had been through a lot. The guy was surprised and asked, "Is he the one his aunt sent?" Mu replied that he did, and the guardian Jean called him. The guy told him to help him. He didn't kill them, and he is innocent. He may have caused trouble for his sister, but he swears he can't even kill a bug. Mu replied that everything was fine. Using his gaze, he said that he too believed in his young master's innocence. Mu knew and realized that he had a special ability. He could recognize murderers. After his meeting with the prisoner, he went to the tavern where all murderers usually spent their time. Upon entering the tavern, he was asked who he was. Mu realized that through his eyes he was seeing murderers. But suddenly the people were not hospitable, and immediately one of them came at him with his fists. But Mu had already made an analysis beforehand and immediately dodged the first strike and counterattacked in return. But the others weren't left out either, and straightway all pounced on him together. But Mu was stronger than all of them, and easily took them out of his way, knocking them out with a single blow. But suddenly one of the most senior men left them, and after thanking the great warrior, offered him anything in return. Mu asked the old man, did he really think he could deceive him with this? Traitor Guyumiran. When the old man heard that he had been exposed, he immediately attacked the warrior. Mu had been waiting for this moment and immediately drew his sword and killed the enemy. He realized that his ability was very useful for the job, and that's why he was sure the young master wasn't a killer. After listening to the prisoner, Mu said that was enough. The boy was surprised and asked, "Is that it?" Mu replied to him not to worry and there would be good news soon. The prisoner asked, "What does that mean? Is he ending the investigation with one question?" and asks the great warrior to ask around some more. But Mu didn't answer him anything more and just went about his business. Yang listened to him and asked, "Was the investigation over yet?" Mu replied that he was experienced enough and the case was not complicated. Yang asked, "Is the young master really guilty?" Mu replied that no, young master is not guilty. Madame lowered her head after saying that and said that it was a relief for her, and so he would be released soon. Mu replied that if they could prove that he was innocent, it could happen as early as tomorrow. It's not that hard. Yang walked over to him and taking his hands thanked the guy for his great contribution to this investigation. But then she realized she had overreacted a bit and turned around and said he had done a great job. Mu replied that there was no problem. But it's not time to relax yet. In this case, it is not a crime of passion, it is a power struggle between the Murim forces. Yang asked in surprise, "What does that mean?" Yang Dokgun is just a vagrant, isn't he? He has nothing to do with the Murim forces. Mu replied that it was correct. Yang Dokgun and the young master were in the center of things. Yang asked, "What does that mean? And does it mean the target is the courtesan Hibong?" Mu replied that yes, and she is no ordinary courtesan. Hibong is part of Murim Main's intelligence service. She's a spy for the Von Renbun branch, and he found traces of the Schwa Ok Su and Sang Hiobo techniques on her body. Both techniques are secret. Her room was also prepared for an alleged attack and escape. It was a typical spy hideout. Yang asked, why would a Murim spy be in a place like Sun Okru? Mu replied that he couldn't understand what Murim Main was thinking. And that's all for today, he will tell the rest at the trial in Loyang. Yang was shocked and asked where is the truth in this case. He has to tell her who the real culprit is, and he already knows everything. Mu replied that yes, he knows everything. But if Murim Main is involved, it's not just business as usual. And if he reveals the truth and the culprit behind the incident, Su Hyangru might be in danger. She's okay with that, right? And he's just a hired hand, so if she wants, he can continue. Yang turned around and replied that she understood. Mu said that of course there are things to know, but sometimes ignorance is the best choice. And she needn't worry, for tomorrow she would be sure to know everything she needed to know. Upon entering his room, he sensed something and immediately sheathed his sword, saying that the night dew is cold. And it was bad for her beautiful skin, so let her come in soon. For a long time the windows did not open, when suddenly a sudden strange wind broke the windows and passed into the room. Mu was already prepared for anything and immediately started fighting the enemy. The mercenary said that it looks like he hasn't lost his skill. And she was happy to see that. Suddenly Mu felt that the mercenary was behind her, and realized that it was the shadow cloud technique. But the guy immediately turned around and repelled her attack. But the mercenary was not easy, and was very good with a sword. Mu continued to fend off all of her attacks and at one point got very close and retaliated. But the mercenary didn't even feel it and tried to pierce him with her sword. But Mu felt it and dodged it. But the mercenary dodged in a moment and ran at him, pushing him onto the bed and sitting on top of him. The mercenary said that when she first saw him she didn't even recognize him. Did he understand that? But what had happened? Where had that old intensity gone? Mu replied that that was right, and he almost didn't recognize her during the day either. The girl asked, "It's been 4 years, hasn't it?" She really missed him. The boy replied that he missed Xie Lan too. The girl told the guy that he realized she was coming, didn't he? Mu hugged her and replied that of course, because she would never forget him. Wouldn't she? Mu turned her over on the bed and said that he almost didn't recognize her. She was even more beautiful than before. After the night spent, Mu said that she was lying without washing her eyes. And Lan replied that he was still the same as ever. In the morning, Mu said that he didn't know she was in Loyang. Lan replied that she had been here for work for half a year. The boy said it must have been hard to be around the old man. The girl replied that it wasn't at all, he barely had the strength to lift a spoon, so it was even easier. Lan asked him how much has he figured out so far. Mu replied that it was a random incident. Falsification of a crime scene. False accusation. And the Fei Len clan's criminal background. And she, a key figure in such an order. Lan said, impressed as always. And he's going to reveal everything? Mu replied that only a false accusation against Meng is his mission. Lan stood up and said that it relieved her. But Guy said that the head of Gu Yu's secret order, one of the 3 great intelligence agencies in the martial arts world, wanders into a simple brothel in the Loyang as a curiosity. Lan replied to him that she could tell him if she joined the order. Mu said that she knew he wasn't that kind of person, didn't she? The girl replied that it was correct. Someone who belongs to no one wanders the world of martial arts. And he had always been such a person. But once the truth is revealed, the martial alliance will intervene. But can't he make concessions, she asked. Mu replied that no. Zhang Men must be safe so that he can get the money from the client. Lan decided to bargain and said she would pay 10 times as much. Mu replied that it was against his code to change clients while working. Len asked him if he was serious. But Guy replied that it was just as he said and the decision would not change. Lan was angry and asked him since when did he start taking up such cases? Mu replied that since he came to Loyang, there was a reason. But the girl stood her ground and told him that he understood that it was cruel to say such things with that expression on his face. And thanks to him, the mission he spent 6 months on failed. Mu asked, does she hate him now? Lan hugged him and replied that she would like to, but he's even more charming than before. This angers her even more. The girl decided to say a final goodbye to him and told him they would see each other next time. At this time, a trial was being held at the Loyang Bureau. And the judge was saying that from this moment on, the retrial of Song Gakryu's murder trial would begin. The judge turned to investigator Cho and said that he stated that there was a real culprit in this case and demanded a retrial. And if it turns out to be unfounded, he will be held responsible for the consequences. Investigator Cho replied that of course he was aware of that. Investigator Cho said he realized something strange about the case. And after reading the interrogation reports, Sung Gak Ryu's staff. On the day of the incident, there were several people outside the room where Meng and Gun were, but none of them heard the screams of victim Hebong. They only heard Yang Dokgun's screams. Yi Zhongmen was found only 10 seconds after the screaming. And despite these unnatural circumstances, because of their love triangle, no one doubted that Zhongmen was guilty. And that's why he realized he needed to reinvestigate. He hired a man who knows how to get to the truth in these cases. And now it was his turn. Mu stepped in front of the court and introduced himself as the one who had reinvestigated the case. And tell them the truth on behalf of Investigator Cho. The judge was pleased and gave him permission. Mu turned to Mr. Yu and asked if he really didn't remember the events of that day. The guy replied that he sure did. How could he lie about something like that? And as he wandered through the martial world, he heard various knowledge. Among them is the knowledge of a certain toxic substance. And there is a poison called manhua. It is a terrible poison that is often used against women. It is colorless, odorless, and undetectable by silver needles after a while. And on the day of the incident, the culprit could have put it in young man's drink, or made him inhale it. And when a man is poisoned by macho, he is forced to obey the commands of the one who introduced him. The counselor told the judge that the speaker was right, and the judge told him to go on with his story. Mu brought a box with him and said it was time to move on to the next item and offered to examine the corpses of the victims. And if they look at their bodies, they'll see something unusual compared to the usual murder victims. And they need to look at Bong's hands and forearms. They're covered in cuts and dissections. And such wounds occur when a person blocks an attack with his hands. These are so-called defensive wounds. On the other hand, there are no defensive wounds on Gun's corpse. From this, they can conclude Bog practiced martial arts. That's why he was able to deny the criminal resistance. And the wounds on the bodies are unusual, too. And the demonstration can clarify the situation. When an untrained person tries to cut something with a sharp blade, they will not make clean cuts. And they don't know how to apply the right force or technique, so the wounds are uneven and lacerated. But when someone like him, trained in martial arts, swings a blade, the wounds are clean and precise from start to finish. So did the wounds on the two bodies. The judge stood up and realized what it meant. But Mu had already answered him that it was correct, and it's a case of a complicated love triangle. And an incident involving a martial arts-trained martial artist. To put it another way, it's a case that requires the intervention of a fighting alliance. But as confusion grew at home and abroad, the power of the royal family waned over time. And on the contrary, the power of the militant alliance grew stronger, and soon they became responsible for security in areas where the government's power did not reach. And so began the conflict between the government and the militant alliance. It was only a matter of time before there would be a clash between them. Eventually, to prevent this, the militant alliance and the government signed an agreement. Wuhan Agreement, concluded in Wuhan, Hubei province, where the martial alliance is headquartered, gives martial artists the right to investigate and punish incidents between themselves, troublesome but a martial artist case. The judge told him that the statement is indeed true. And it is an undisputed fact. Ban and young Master Yang have more than 80 wounds. With the strength of a bone wound, only those who have mastered martial arts can inflict dozens of sharp cuts. Mu said that young Meng, who had never practiced martial arts, would not have been able to do that. And here's another piece of evidence. This is the weapon that young man was holding at the time of the incident. It's assumed to have been used in the crime, and as the judge sees it, it's an ordinary kitchen knife. If such a knife were used to wound bones, the blade would inevitably be damaged, and on God's rib, there's a wound where the blade stabbed in. It is a wound caused by the point of a knife, which cannot be caused by an ordinary kitchen knife, and the perpetrator treated the wound, but couldn't erase all traces. When they put all the evidence together, it turns out that the perpetrator is someone who has mastered martial arts and uses a weapon with a sharp. And this man killed Bong and young Master Yang, and then manipulated the crime scene and evidence, framing young man for all the crimes. The judge realized that the report that Young Meng was not the culprit had not been sent to the authorities. So he asked if he had found out who the real perpetrator was. The old man asked the investigator why he was looking at him like that. Cho replied that he thought Lu Zhu was involved. But he doesn't think he is directly involved in the incident. But the involvement of the courtesans from Sung Ok Ru is obvious. According to the truth that Jin's escort revealed earlier, and if it wasn't for the cooperation of the courtesans who were servicing young man at the time, if they hadn't drugged him and made him look like a criminal. Cho said this means that besides the real culprit, there must be another accomplice among the courtesans. The old man replied that it was only their suspicion. And Cho said he would send guards to Sun Okru this morning. Suddenly the guards came and told them to open the doors. But starting with the manager Sun Ok, the 4 courtesans as well as the 6 maids disappeared, and only 11 people. Although they haven't caught the real culprit yet, it's already clear that this isn't just a love triangle. And this case involves a serious conspiracy involving a militant alliance. He offers to cooperate with them immediately to track down the real culprit. The judge was shocked and wondered why he was hesitating. After all, there were so many eyes watching him now. The judge thought for a moment and said that he had made his decision. Since young man's innocence has been proven, he will be immediately acquitted. The next day in Loyang Jinping, the lady was in her room resting. Suddenly, a servant entered unexpectedly and addressed the mistress. The girl said the previous operation was complete, all traces erased. No one will be able to trace them. The lady replied that it was a good job. The servant asked her if it was really all right, and what if something goes wrong before they get a response from higher-ups and something terrible happens. The lady replied that there was no need to worry about it, and let her just give it to the Lord. The servant suddenly said to the mistress to avoid future trouble, should they kill that man who came to the brothel last time? Mistress couldn't stand it and started laughing. She said, a puppy who knows no fear of the tiger. Let her stop. There are only a few people who know his real identity even in the secret command. This was because none of those who fought him survived. After completing the task, Mu was rewarded with gold coins. Mu was surprised and said why she was so kind to him. The maid replied that he had saved their Min's life. She feels it's not enough and doesn't know how to express my gratitude. Also, if the great martial artist doesn't mind, then anytime. Mu was already prepared and introduced Lady Ru, but Lady Ru was so angry that she told him to take the payment and end it all. Hyang said he gets so perverted every time his back is put up. Mu replied that it was the one and only color under the sky which he could do when the flowers came to him first. Hyang asked, of course with surprise, why out of all the nicknames had to choose this one. How can you do that to Seol Ah, who is like a niece to her, and he knows she never stops anyone, so why act like that? Mu cleaned up right away and said he was leaving, but Hyang replied that he only calls her Lady Ru at times like this. At this moment, Mu headed to his room as on the way he felt something strange, and to avoid his death he immediately grabbed his blade to be on guard. And he realized that someone had entered his room. Mu immediately realized that this was not Seo Lan, it was the energy of a person trained in martial arts. But suddenly a bolt of lightning passed in front of him, which he himself had not expected, and a man appeared out of the shadows. The stranger asked the guy why he was in such a hurry. Shouldn't good tea be drunk slowly? Mu replied that he did not recall inviting the man into his room to serve him tea. But the guy felt that the stranger was hiding it, but he had a lot of inner energy. The stranger told the guy not to be so hostile, he just came to chat. And if he openly enters the courtesan's house, his wife will find out and he will be in a very bad way. Mu asked him if he was afraid of his wife. The stranger replied that he adores his wife. Belatedly, however, people call him the Golden Deity of Unri. Aeon told the kid that he probably already knew. Mu asked if he did. The guy was surprised and asked. Aeon told the guy that he didn't know the Golden Deity Unri, the leader of the Loyalist branch of the Martial Alliance. But Mu asked, then it turns out the leader of the Loyalist department breaks into someone else's room and steals tea? Aeon replied that he stole and never mind. It seems like it's going to take a long time. He heard that the guy was the one who cleared young man's name, and since he uncovered the truth about this murder, he should know about the real culprit, and whether he knows the true motive and the true culprit behind this murder. Mu thought, didn't the Pun Ryuan clan say anything to the Loyang branch? And then he replied that he didn't know. Aeon asked the guy if it was true. Mu replied that the government had sent an official request to the Fighting Alliance. So if he had any questions, let him ask. Aeon says they don't know any more about the incident than he does. He can't even imagine that they know more than the guy. And if he's hiding something, what does he want to beat it out of him by force? Mu immediately decided to prepare himself and grabbed his sword, but Aeon told him to forget about it. He just came to see him today. Treating the Golden Deity Unri as a mere commoner, he liked him a lot, and they will see each other again soon. Mu told him lastly that he really didn't know who the man was talking about. Going to the writing room, Chunchu Mu asked Su if he had found him. Su replied that they would have a drink first. After a few glasses, Mu was surprised and asked, is he sharing such fine wine? Su replied that it had to be at least that good, and that the smell of blood he encountered should be overwhelming. Mu asked him, is he saying there will be bloodshed? Looking into the glass, he saw his reflection, but raising his glass said that there was nothing new in the bloodshed and it was worth telling already. Su replied that he had found Jang So-hwa. Su revealed that she is in an abandoned shrine east of Mount Huiji. She is with an old man who seems to be serving her. Mu was surprised and said that he found her faster than he thought. Su replied that he was able to track her down because she had recently passed through Loyang. Mu stood up and said then he would go right away. But Su asked him if he had heard of the Blood Snake Society, and they are looking for Jang So-hwa. Mu replied that of course he hadn't heard. And even in his heart he didn't know what kind of people they really were. As he set out on his journey, he remembered that Su had said earlier that even he must have heard of the Azura blood cult. 6 years ago, the leader of the Blood Snake Society had changed. They also say he uses the martial arts of the Azura blood cult. And the Azura blood cult is the last sect that until recently used the Hakan horn and the Black Heart blade. But Mu was shocked and he had to find an old shrine on a mountain full of graves. But suddenly on his way he saw those very graves, but saw a few more people running in front of him and he said problem solved. The guys walked through the forest and stopped right in front of the house Su had talked about earlier. The elder told his men that they needed to come in. Mu also came in and asked, so is she really there? The mercenary turned around and was shocked that he didn't even sense the stranger next to him. The guy immediately jumped on him and asked him who he was, and in a moment attacked with his hard punch. But Mu replied that he was a bodyguard from the courtesan house. He used this moment and repelled the guy's attack. Without wasting any time, he immediately delivered a strong kick with his leg straight into the enemy's chest. leaving him no chance. But the rest of the mercenaries also saw that the stranger had come along with them and headed to attack. But Mu wasn't even intimidated by this, and waving his arm, he easily repelled one of them head-on. But Mu decided to leave no one alive and made sure to eliminate every single mercenary. After finishing all the mercenaries, he raised his hat and said that was the end of it. And he saw that the door to the house was open. But going inside, he saw that there was a man sitting on the floor. But he was so emaciated that all the bones of his body were visible. Mu turned to Seowa and said that if she was still alive, let her come out. After all, he saw her hiding under the blanket. Seowa showed herself and asked who he was. Mu saw that she was the girl he was looking for and replied that he was her father's comrade. Suddenly, after the guy entered the house, suddenly one man and his team came to the place. The masked guy said he was a little late, and some of the bloody assassins have already fallen before this guy. He's not just the enemy. He immediately ordered his warriors to immediately use any means necessary and kill him, and it is their priority to guard Chang Xiao's flower. Mu introduced himself to the girl so that she would not be afraid, but the girl said his name and called him Uncle Mu. Mu asked her if she knew him. Hua replied that her father had told her a lot about him in his letters. Mu immediately noticed that this child was very talkative, but suddenly Hua slowly began to fall down with her eyes closed. Mu immediately caught her and saw that her body was very weak. And such hardship for a small child is very terrible. But suddenly the guy turned around and felt that he was not alone here, and they would continue the conversation later. Mu tied her on his back and said they had an intruder, and he prepared to fight them. But the mercenaries didn't stay away for long, and one of them destroyed the roof of the house and immediately attacked them. Mu reacted in time and used his sword to repel his opponent's first attack. He broke his sword into 2 pieces, but he was followed by the rest of the mercenaries who were already at the ready and understood their job. But Mu decided not to let them live, for they would follow them and find out the location of their home. But one he immediately swooped down on from the air, and as the mercenary attacked, he fell with both feet right into his arm and broke it. And after that, he placed his sword in front of his face, and after that, he immediately used his legs and smashed his enemy in the head. Lastly, Mu told them to choose their opponent more carefully. After that, he also approached the old man. The boy told him he'd worked hard to protect Hua, and now he could leave it to him and then he could rest easy. But coming out of the door, he saw that he was trapped and the mercenaries tried to tie him up. But Mu wasn't afraid of that and immediately started swinging his sword and shattered the net into small pieces. The mercenary didn't expect such a turn, for he didn't believe it would happen like this and would easily break their trap. Then the next mercenary threw arrows directly at him that would have paralyzed him. But Mu turned around and started reflecting everything. Stopping one of them, he asked if he knew who he was dealing with. Using the power of air, he attacked his opponent. Suddenly Mu rejoiced, for he saw that everyone was finished. But suddenly he saw a sword in front of his throat and he immediately turned around. Doing a little somersault, he thought, what kind of disguise is this? After all, a normal person wouldn't even notice. But the mercenary didn't stop there and continued to attack in various ways. But Mu kept dodging. The mercenary wondered if he had blocked his attack, and no way he could see through his cloaking technique. But the mercenary decided to act differently and attacked the guy from behind. But Mu turned around and shot him right in the shoulder. The mercenary grabbed his hand and asked how could he see his technique. Mu replied that he had encountered a stealth technique far superior to his. The mercenary said that it was indeed, after all, a person with such incredible martial arts skills that even all 10 blood slayers combined would not be able to resist him. And he admits that the attack on him was his mistake. They recognize the damage they've done, so they'll stop there. Mu asked the mercenary if he knew it was bullshit. They started this fight, but it's not up to them to decide when it ends. But the mercenary realized that he would be easily killed and asked that he listen to him first. There's something he doesn't know about this situation, but Mu decided not to leave him alone and put his sword in front of his face. The mercenary was frightened and said that his name was Jang Wook and he was the head of the Bloody Assassin clan. Brother Jangwon and Uncle Seowa. Let the boy let go of his sword and listen to what he has to say. Mu remembered that brat Chang Woong had talked about Seowa but never once mentioned his family ties. But in other words, it's not something he should care about. Mu asked him what he wanted. Un was surprised and asked what? Mu attacked the guy and replied that Jang Woong had asked him to protect Seohu. Whatever he was to her, if he interfered with his request, he would simply destroy him. Wook immediately grabbed onto his sword and yelled at the kid to stop, and realized that it was already his child. Mu told Seowa to bear with her a little longer. Wook defended himself and asked him to stop, but didn't understand why he was doing that, and he's not even a blood relative of Seowa, and there is no need for him to be. Mu replied that that's right, he's not blood related to her. Mu raised his sword into the air and immediately attacked his opponent with his first attack, not even leaving him no chance. Wook was shocked and didn't understand why he didn't come. But Mu said that the mercenary was running an errand. And is there anything else needed? And he looked at the girl and said that this guy was her uncle. And then he saw her pass out. Mu asked that she not die. After all, he didn't find her to bury her. After all this, the chief arrived on the scene and told Bodywook that he had disappointed him again. If he didn't want to die so senselessly, he had to report that Jin Muon was the one who killed the 3 members of the blood sect in the slum. And he knew one was on the east coast, but to see him here. But why did Mu take Seowa? Mu took her to her room and gave her a bed to rest on. But suddenly Hyang came in and asked how she was. The girl looked and asked, isn't she the child of his comrade? Mu said yes. Thanks to the doctor she called, she felt much better. Hyang said that for her information, it wasn't free. She would charge him for it. Mu replied that no problem, he didn't plan to be in debt for long anyway. Hyang was surprised and asked with astonishment, what? Mu replied that this child was being hunted. They probably won't give up that easily. And if Seowa stays here, Suong Pavilion might be in danger. He needs to go somewhere else before that happens. But Hyang told the guy that it looks like he's underestimating her. She's the owner who made Suong Pavilion the best brothel in Nakiang. Does he think she won it in some gambling den? She fought off countless rivals who were jealous of her, and even made government officials and those in power their allies to build it. And what does he think? Someone would dare to invade her Suong Pavilion and even kidnap a little girl, and let the enemy try if they dare. He'll regret it. And besides, whatever happens, he'll protect the child, won't he? Mu said that it was even kind of too much already. But Hyang replied that she didn't expect him to be able to find a decent place for a girl, and let him not even think about going anywhere else and take good care of the baby. She already has plenty of work for the future. Mu replied to the landlady that he understood. Hyang told the guy that his skills were too valuable to waste on a bodyguard in a brothel. How about a part-time job? Like a bounty hunter or a mercenary? Mu asked with surprise, a part-time job? Hyang asked him, what does he think, raising a child for free? He said he needed money, right? With a baby in his arms, he's gonna need more, isn't he? But not just blood and guts. If he works in their Suong Pavilion where all sorts of people come and go, there will be no shortage of work. Mu replied that he would think about it. But Hyang said she would wait for a good answer. Seowa can stay here for a while. Mu walked over to the child's body and said that he was unmarried, and even with a child. But at that moment, a strange energy passed through his body. Suddenly after a few hours, Hwa regained consciousness and opened her eyes. But she didn't realize where she was. Mu saw this and asked, is she awake yet? But she's safe now, so she can relax. Hwa immediately stood up and wanted to thank the master. But Mu replied that she shouldn't force herself, she had barely survived after all. But Mu decided to talk to her and told her that she had a lot of questions for her. But would she be able to answer them? Hwa wasn't surprised, and just kept quiet. But Mu asked her why the assassins were after her. Jangwon never said she would be in such a situation. Hwa replied that she had made a big mistake. Her uncle had chased her and her father, trying to catch them. And her father had left her in the care of her teacher. He thought he could protect her that way. Mu wondered and asked with surprise, a mistake? And what mistake could have made him so desperate to pursue her? Hwa replied that she let her uncle know about her abilities. And when she touches an object, she can read information about the person it belonged to. But Mu wouldn't believe anything at all and asked her, what is this nonsense? But Hwa was shocked that he didn't even believe her. Hwa said she knew it was hard to believe, but it was true. Her father knew about her ability. He told her never to tell anyone about it. But 4 years ago, she was too young and mistakenly told her uncle about her abilities. That day, he grabbed her by the arms and started dragging her along. And he led her to a very strange man. Her uncle tried to take her to a very scary man. Her father took her and ran away. He left her with an elderly servant and sent her away. And just like that, running away from her uncle, she accidentally touched his thing. And then she came all the way over here. Mu said she wanted to say that Chong-won came to Qinghai to meet him and her, but honestly, it's hard to believe. But if what this kid says is true, I suddenly remembered what my friend had said about the dark soul. Mu thought for a moment and told the girl that he would ask her one thing. Her father had told him before he died that she knew about the dark soul. It's a secret that no one in the world knows but him. He never told her father about it. Chong-won knew about it. And did she really know it because of her ability? But then what was that thing she touched? Let her show it. Hwa replied that there was something before that she wanted to confirm. Mu was surprised and asked, confirm? And what does she mean by that? Hwa asked him if he was going to continue to fulfill her father's request. Mu sighed and replied, what a brave child she was. If she really saw her memories, she should know what kind of person he was, and to take something from a little girl like her. As easy as breathing. And knowing that, she dares to test him? Hwa replies that she actually knows how scary he is. But still, she knows he won't do that. With a little kid like her, he's very good at talking. Mu said he would ask again, if her ability is real, she should be able to look beyond the dark soul. It is possible, right? Hwa replied that she couldn't look beyond her limits with that body. It would take a lot of energy. But once her body recovers, she can begin. And gives him the words, in this case. Mu thought and said that he would definitely fulfill her father's request. And now he realized why he had been looking for her. After all, a lifetime spent as a mercenary wandering, it makes no sense for him to care about Hwa just because she's his comrade's daughter. And that's why everyone who knows him is puzzled. He hoped that Hwa's ability to recognize a dark soul was real, so he sought it out. But certainly not for such a trifling reason as loyalty to a comrade. But Mu told her that if it was all a lie, let her not think that he would be lenient with her just because she was a child. After all, she would still pay for her lies. Hwa was frightened after his words and began to cry. But Mu realized that he had gone overboard with the threats and now he couldn't call himself a normal adult. But it can't be helped, this is how he's been living, and this is the only way he knows how to behave. But suddenly Hwa said that he was the only one she could trust now anyway. But Mu realized that he was no longer a mercenary. And in that case, he told her that if she kept her promise, he would protect her even if it cost him his life. He thought that after saying that, he could apologize to her. Hwa cried even more and thanked her master. Hwa pulled an object out of her bag suddenly and said it was the object she was reading his memories from. Mu asked her where did she get it? She bought it from a traveling merchant selling goods on the street. Mu told her that if she could read memories, she had to have seen the person who gave it to him. Hwa replied that was correct and she had seen her. She was a very beautiful woman. Mu listened to her and said that this once again confirms her ability. Loyang is a very strange city, and the memories of old friends are scattered like this. Afterward, he came to see Hyang. She asked him if the conversation with the child had gone well. Mu replied that yes, and he had learned everything he wanted to know. Hyang listened and asked him if he had been rude to her. Mu suddenly replied that he wanted to ask her something. Mu called out Dan Ryun's name and said that he meant her. Doesn't Hyang know if she's at Zhongjong Manor right now? Hyang asked him why he was asking about her out of the blue. Mu replied that he was just curious, that's all. Hyang immediately thought of his cheating and said that they used to be inseparable and now he doesn't even know where he is. But Mu didn't answer anything for he really didn't know. But Hyang asked him again, did he really not know? And he was just unbelievable. Mu suddenly conspired and asked her why she was paying attention to a woman who was nowhere to be seen. But Hyang replied that she knows and that's what makes everything so strange. Why is she suddenly so interested in someone who is no longer there? Mu pulled his gaze away and replied that there was no reason, and that was the truth. And he wasn't planning anything. He was just curious. But Hyang said she doesn't believe him because she has known him for a long time. But if he's so curious, she can tell him. And he will still find out for himself if he wants to. Hyang said that Dan Ryun was from the Zhongjong clan. But Mu was shocked when he heard that and knew what it meant. Hyang continued and said that if the daughter of the fallen Dan Ri clan is in the number 1 Zhongjong clan in Hanam, isn't it obvious why? Dan Ryun became the concubine of the young lord of the Zhongjong clan, Mu Guansama. It's been 8 years now. Mu was in shock and couldn't digest all of this. He asked with surprise, but couldn't believe it and said that even if her family fell, Yun is the most beautiful woman in Gamsuk province, how could she become someone's concubine? Hyang asked him, what did he himself think? After becoming the concubine of the Zhongjong clan, the Danri clan was able to regain its position to join the 5 great clans of Gamsuk. And that's the whole point of political marriages, isn't it? Not everyone can live like him, free to go with the flow like a cloud. Mu asked, is she doing well? But Hyang answered him that he is acting very strange. Why is he so interested in her today? Mu replied that he had his reasons. Because he had given it to her and she had somehow found her way back to him. Hyang looked shocked and asked, did he give her the black shadow pearl? And now it's here? But how did it happen? Mu replied that Seowa had it. She said she had bought it from a strolling vendor at the market. Hyang said that's why he's asking about Dan Ryun. But how did she end up with a traveling trader? Mu replied that when a person gives someone a black shadow pearl, it means that they have the right to make a request to them. And such a thing shouldn't just be sold on the market. Hyang said that she used to receive occasional news about her, but about 6 months ago, all contact broke off. And since then, no one from the Zhongjong clan has said a word about her. It's as if they issued a banning order. Mu wondered and asked if there was any way to find out what was going on in the clan. Did she happen to know anyone with connections there? Hyang replied that she's not a know-it-all. Maybe Sukcho can help. But Mu replied that no one knows how much he would charge. But the girl told him to stop being such a cheapskate. And there is a way to find out. Mu didn't believe it and asked her if she was lying. Yang replied that she was curious too. Why would she hand over the Black Shadow Pearl to someone outside of her clan? Mu was so excited he even hugged her and told her he was grateful for her and she was amazing. But Yang heard his words and realized that he should thank her properly, not just with words. Mu asked her what did she mean by that. Yang replied that nothing in this world is free. And he gives something away to get something. And he just agreed to her second request. Mu didn't refuse and replied that she was such a miser. Suddenly, guests came to the clan and the girl told the clan head that Vice Commander Nam Wee Jae of the patrol squad had arrived from the Alliance. The clan head met them and said that she didn't expect them to come in person. But at the moment, Nam Wee Jae, the Vice Commander of the patrol squad, also known as the Bloody Tiger Fang, Ju looked at the clan head and said did she forget how much the Alliance Master had invested in this? Ju replied that of course not. Jae tells her that the higher-ups want to know why she dumped Song Gakuryu so easily. If her explanation isn't convincing, she'll be punished. Ju replied that she would accept the punishment if she deserved it. The servant understood at this moment that the patrol squad and Gu Yu's secret order were intelligence and surveillance services. Vice Commander Nam uses this incident to try to weaken the authority of Gu Yu's secret order. Jae started yelling at her and told her to tell them why she decided to leave Sungakru. The head of the Ju clan answered him that because of the sect, the Dark Soul of Calamity, and asked the commander if he remembered them. Jae replied that it was a group that disappeared after being annihilated on the battlefield of the Great 10 Martyrs 15 years ago. But why bring up that name now? Ju replied that after the Dark Soul disaster sect disappeared along with the 3,000 martyrs and the twin evils, the Alliance Master ordered them to avoid the conflict of the still remnants at all costs. Jae says she means to say that the decision to leave Sangakru is related to the Dark Soul disaster sect. Ju replied that unfortunately, yes. And what's more, the Martial Alliance had just sent Lord Sama Y and 5 hidden dragons to investigate Songgok Ryu, and the Martial Alliance clearly views this as something very serious. If she hadn't made a quick decision to retreat, they'd be feuding with them right now, and risking not only Gu Yu's secret order but the entire Sun and Moon Alliance. She believes that the head of the alliance will find her decision to be the right one. But suddenly Jae didn't believe it and said what a ridiculous excuse. She must be desperate to use something so far-fetched as an example. But Ju replied that whether they believed her or not didn't change the facts. What matters is that the shadow of the ghost loomed over the incident and she drew the right conclusion. But Jae told her to shut up. And by making up unprovable allegations, she's only adding to her guilt. And now he's ordering her to be arrested right now and brought to the Alliance Master. Have her gather her men immediately and send them to the head. And he will personally apprehend her. Ju saw that they weren't going to talk and asked, so they chose this development. After her words, she gave a wave to her men to finish off that filthy scum's guards. Ju attacked not the commander and told him how dare he show his arrogance in Gu Yu's order. Ju put her sword in front of his throat and asked him if he thought he could walk away in one piece after something like that. Ju asked, since when did the deputy decide if what she said was true? She even wondered who had given him that authority. Or maybe he was just that confident in his abilities. Jae realized he couldn't do anything else after that, so he just kept quiet. But Ju turned around and said that she apologized. And Lord Yang should have read her report by now. And even if the deputy simply relayed her words, he would have nothing to blame her for. Jae replied that if there were problems even after that, he would take full responsibility. And Ms. Ju's arrogance would only make life difficult for their leader. Ms. Ju turned around and said to the commander, what a mouthful, isn't he the Lord of Justice? And she didn't know he cared so much about their leader. Jae said that one day they would have to pay for their arrogance, no matter how bright the flower was, and it never blooms for longer than 10 days. Ju told the servant that she now looked like she thought she had crossed the line. The girl replied that it wasn't that. She just wondered if she should treat him so coldly he would probably come back and start spreading rumors. That worthless blabbermouth can't do much more than that. And if they dare cross the line, she'll do to them what she did to them today. But still, dealing with people like him was so tiring. And she thought maybe she should visit the man tonight. At that time, Mu was present at the girls' inspection. The best doctor came and checked Hua. The doctor said he did the best he could with his prescriptions, but recovery is slow, and it would take time for them to recover their strength. Mu looked at her suddenly and asked why she looked so depressed. Hua replied that it's just that she wants to get better soon so she can help him, but she's still so weak. Mu saw that she was very sad and told her not to talk nonsense, and let her forget about everything else and focus on resting. That way she would be able to help more. Hua cried and asked him to forgive her for being born weak. But Mu replied that if she was afraid someone else would come after her, then let her not waste her energy. And those uncles and members of the Blood Temple who were after her, they're all dead. And now that he thinks about it, if her uncle heads up some sort of blood temple, her family must have been very powerful. Hwa replied that her family were direct descendants of the Azura blood sect. It was wiped out 30 years ago. Mu grabbed his head and said things were getting even more confusing. The Azura blood sect were notorious for their sorcery and techniques. It was an openly heretical sect, and leadership was passed down through women. That explains the child's unusual abilities and nervousness. No wonder she's so nervous. And the Azura blood sect was the main target of the Martial Alliance during the great military upheavals. If a child is found to be a descendant of the Azura blood sect, and the Martial Alliance will hunt her down. And anyone who defends her will also be marked for death. And it's not something to be taken lightly. If he did resign, ignoring it would be the best option. And now he realized that Suk-cho had been right. He'd gotten himself into a mess he'd made himself. But he knows Hwa is worried sick, Mu said, and so she needs to focus on resting and recovering. Don't worry, whoever comes after her will protect her. Hwa cried at those words and thanked her uncle. Mu said that she was a smart child, but she thought too much. And now he's talking to Ru and seeing if she can help with some small task. Hwa was overjoyed and thanked her and promised that she would do her best. Mu replied that of course, as she would make a full recovery. Suddenly he remembered and said that if her real name became known, it would cause problems. And it would be better to give her a new name. After thinking about it, he decided that she would be Jin Soso from now on. And she would be his niece. The girl smiled at her new name and rejoiced. Upon arriving at Mrs. Ru's house, she asked how the child was. Mu replied that she was slowly recovering. It would take a long time for her to regain her strength. Ms. Hyang says it's quite amusing to watch. And as she sees it, Mu is playing the parent. Mu got angry and replied that he had been told by a bachelorette who had never been married. Hyang said it's okay to let her stay until she feels better. And Suwon Pavilion isn't so small that they can't take in one child. Suddenly she asked Mu if he was still curious about Ayun. The guy said of course and asked her why she was asking. Hyang replied that things have been tense in the Sama clan lately. And that prodigy, Sama Hui, who was the most talented in the clan, was in a martial alliance but had recently returned if rumors were to be believed. Hyang asked the guy if he knew him. Mu put his head to the side at the moment and pretended he didn't understand who she was talking about. Mu realized that this was trouble and he was the only one who thought it couldn't get any worse. And why he should go back now. Mu said he didn't know who she was talking about. But Hyang thought it was very strange that he took his gaze away from her and realized he was lying. Hyang approached him from behind and asked him if he was sure. Immediately Mu replied that he thought he had heard of him before. Hyang said that this child is known as the Azure Dragon of the Heavens, one of the 10 martial arts masters. Mu asked if he was too old to be called a child. The lady replied that she had heard that he was 24, but how did he know that? It's not like they don't allow teenagers to join the 10 masters. And in any case, they know the Sama clan is up to something, and suggested she focus on the request. Hyang replied that that's exactly what she was going for. And the customer for this job is Georgina. If he's a member of the 7 cultivation colors, doesn't he have a bodyguard? If it's about asking for one, can't he just ask for one? But of course the point is that it's about a bodyguard. Mu laughed and asked, had he forgotten his job and was trying to hit on Georgina? Dealing with guys like that was his specialty. Hyang replied that's not the point. Does he think all men are like him? Mu said he doubts Nien Hyang would put up with that. Hyang replied that he would find out directly from her anything she could say, and if he took after that request, he would get information about the inner workings of the Sama clan. Georgina would make sure he was well rewarded. Mu listened to her words and went about his business. But on the way he thought, why had Hyang built Xian Lu's tower so tall? Guests will fall just trying to get here. As he climbed to the very top, he saw a huge door and realized that Georgina was here. Mu opened the door and immediately introduced himself. But suddenly in a moment, he saw a fist in front of his face and immediately repulsed her. The warrior who was in the room didn't want to stop and kept throwing meaningless blows that Mu defended himself against. Mu said that he had heard that Xian Lu's 7 colors were almost impossible to encounter. And he didn't expect that this was actually the case. Mu didn't deal with him for long, and using an ice punch, he slashed at the guy and wounded his body. The guy realized he couldn't dodge it or even block it. But suddenly in a moment Mu stopped in front of his attack. Mu told the guy that he had decent skills, but he was too open. And the guy replied that he himself didn't expect to be appreciated back. The guy introduced himself and said his name was Mention and he was Dahlia's bodyguard, and he apologizes to the Lord for the sudden attack. There is a reason for it. Mu replies that he's not interested in pleasantries. And frankly, it annoys him. All of a sudden Mu asked the guy, what did he say we mention? He came here to handle something he couldn't handle. And this is the kind of reception? But suddenly Georgina walked in and told him not to blame V's bodyguard. She gave the order herself. The girl introduced herself and said her name was Georgina and suggested that the situation not escalate. After all, she had to see for herself if he was the right man for the job. This job is extremely dangerous, and only someone with exceptional skills can handle it. And since she hadn't met Jin Hui before, she needed to test his skills. Mu replied that if that was the case, he wouldn't argue. Meshin was surprised at the fact that this guy became polite so quickly, and it's certainly unbelievable. But his martial arts are no joke. After all, he was more than capable of messing around with someone like him. Mu recalled Hyang's words that if he presented himself to Dahlia, he should realize what would happen. Such words made him frightened, and he said that his name was Mu and his bodyguard. Georgina replied that she understood everything, and she apologizes again for the way he was treated. And to make it up to him, she made a nice tea, and they could drink tea and start talking. Sitting down at the table, Georgina said that she had heard about the murder case at Sung Ok Pavilion, and Mr. Mu cleared the name of an innocent man. Mu didn't talk long and asked her if she could spare him the small talk. More importantly, what job required a test of his skills? And it was time to cut to the chase. Georgina replies that yes, and that is exactly what they will do, and asks him to understand that this issue is incredibly important to her and V's bodyguard, and if it is not resolved, she will be forced into an unwanted marriage. Mu understood and asked her to continue. Georgina said her real name is Gok Unsol, and she is a descendant of the Gok family, practicing martial arts. And for more than a century, the Gok family ran a small martial arts school in Loyang. But after her father, Gok, lost a duel to a traveling swordsman, the family's fortunes began to crumble. Her father had endured ridicule and scorn from the Loyang martial artists, and all of his students had left. After that, he tried everything to revive the family, but nothing worked. And 3 years ago, her father borrowed a large sum of money from a man named Jin Junhee, but in the end, he was never able to save the family. Her father passed away because the internal trauma from sparring made itself felt again. And even her mother became ill. In order to take care of her younger siblings and pay her debts, she became a courtesan. But luckily, she joined Sukyan Chilwa and was able to save enough money to pay off all her debts. But at the last meeting to settle things, Jin Zhang talked about something unexpected. That day, Junhai said she probably didn't know, but her father borrowed even more money from him than he did here. And that person presented a promissory note stamped with the Gok family's martial arts school seal. The amount was huge, far more than she could ever hope to repay. Mu thought and said that perhaps he had offered some conditions in exchange for destroying the promissory note. Georgina was surprised and asked how he knew about it. Mu replied that the tricks of dubious moneylenders were easy to recognize. And what conditions did he set? It was a forced marriage, wasn't it? Georgina replied that yes, that was correct. But he didn't propose himself. He wanted her to marry someone else. Mu asked, and for whom? Menshin replied, a little unusually, but his name is Yang Jae-hyun. Mu said it was a familiar name to him, and asked if he was related to V's guard. Georgina replied that Yang Jae-hyun was the guard V's teacher. Mu realized that things had just gotten complicated. Mu said that since Jae-hyun is guardian V's teacher, he can't interfere. That's why the request came to him, right? Georgina replied that no, that was not the only reason. Mu was surprised and asked that they tell him the details of the request, but let them keep it in mind. He actually stepped away from the mercenary business. If the job involves destroying a promissory note, or killing Junhai or Jae-hyun, he'll refuse. He doesn't do that kind of work anymore. Menshin got angry and asked, killing the teacher? Let Mr. Mu watch his language for a while. Georgina saw this and asked him to calm down. Mu said he would consider that the wrong request. Georgina replied that Guardian V tried to help even knowing that his teacher was involved, but she strongly advised him not to do so. Guard V's entire family works as servants for Jae-hyun at the Baireg Martial Arts School. If Guard Vi gets involved, his family could be jeopardized. V was angry and said it was all because of him. Georgina said she couldn't let V's guard take such a risk for her trouble. Mu noticed something and was even surprised, and thought, what exactly does Hyang want from him? Is he supposed to play the role of matchmaker between these two? Georgina said what she disliked most was what Junhai said. Until the last day, her father had never once mentioned additional debts, even on his deathbed. And he wasn't the type to hide such things. Mu said that the promissory note was fake. Georgina replied that it was. and asked Jin's guardian to prove that it was a forgery. After all, he is the legendary guardian Jin who has exposed injustice against a deserving subject in a single day, and his martial art is unrivaled. And she's confident he's up to the task. Mu realized that the scheme to forge the seal of a martial arts family and the involvement of a famous school. It's really not an easy case and needs someone with his skills to check it out. And now of course he understands why Nan Hyang recommended him. He's the only one who can do the job. Mu told them that they knew he wasn't cheap, right? Georgina asked him in return if he was accepting the request. Mu replied that yes. 15 yen as a down payment. If he fails, he won't ask for more, but if he succeeds, he needs other compensation, not money. Does she agree to the terms? Georgina immediately replied that she agreed. Taking the money in his hands, Mu said that they had reached an agreement. And now he could leave him everything. And now he had some questions for Lady Gok. Georgina replied that she did and she would answer what she could. Mu asked the seal on the promissory note, how similar was it to her family's original seal? Georgina replied that it was so identical that it could not be distinguished with the naked eye. And their seal has intricate patterns that follow certain rules. And it's not easy to fake, even a perfect fake won't fool her. Mu thought and said that even if the fake was so good that Lady Day couldn't tell, it should be the work of experts. And does she know anyone in Loyang who could create something so flawless? Menshin replied that he had asked around. There was no one with that level of skill in Loyang right now. Mu said that since there is no one now, there was someone in the past? Menshin replied that yes, that is exactly right. Mu asked, and who was it? Menshin replied that his name was Udok Sam. But they had no reason to suspect him. Mu asked, why not? The guy replied that because he was dead. More than 5 years ago, long before the promissory note was drawn up. Mu listened to their terms and came to the lady immediately afterward. Hyang met him and asked him why he was so annoyed. Let him calm down a little. But Mu still couldn't cool down and asked, isn't this like defending a lover under the guise of asking? Is he some kind of bridge to reunite separated lovers like the shepherd and the weaver? But Hyang asked him back, isn't that nice? At the very least, it's a request to kill someone. Or does he prefer to get assignments like this? Mu replied that of course he didn't mind earning some money. But Hyang told him that if he completed the task successfully, Unsol would introduce him to someone. The guy hearing such words immediately took note. The girl said that with someone who was well versed in the inner workings of the Sama family. Mu replied that since he had taken the job, he would do it properly. But Hyang said that of course Yunseal and Vi's relationship should never end. Mu asked her why didn't she just tie them together with red thread. But he had already figured it out, and he's no longer accepting requests to kill people. And he's not going to solve problems that way. He asked her, had she ever investigated the case of Udoksam? Hyang replied that he was not only a top-ranking expert in Loyang, but also one of the most famous forgers in Hunan province. He died of an illness 5 years ago. And she had also heard that he had a wife and daughter, but 7 years ago someone had killed them. Mu was surprised and asked, had his family been killed or something? Hyang replied that he had many customers, but also many enemies. Such things are common for people from the underworld. Mu said it was true, but could he have the ability to perfectly forge a seal? Hyang replied that judging from his reputation, it looked like he had the ability to do so. But the guy thought about it and said that there were 2 options. Either he made a forged seal and gave it to Jin Junhee before he died. Either there's an heir who was secretly trained in the Doksam forgery technique. Hyang asked him which he thought was more likely. Mu replied that they would only find out after further investigation and let her tell him everything she knows about Jae Hyan, Master Vi. Hyang said that he is 47 years old. His nickname is Flying Dragon Spear. He is the owner of the Flying Dragon Fighting Hall, with a history of over 50 years and with considerable prestige in the orthodox martial world of Loyang. And about a year and a half ago, he made a lot of effort to woo Yunseal, but he was constantly rejected. Because of his pride, he acted cautiously, so the rumors didn't spread. Mu said that an old man who had lived for many years was acting so ridiculous. But suddenly he remembered and asked, when did we mention become a bodyguard? Hyang replied that a year ago, of course she knew he was Jae Hyun's disciple. Because the latter had personally asked to accept him, and he shouldn't even be asking about it. Does he know how many rats are gathering around the liquor and vodka business? And to do business here without problems, whether it's the Orthodox sects or the Sama clan, you have to maintain close relationships with sects of a certain size. Mu asked, so she needed the support of the Flying Dragon Battle Hall? The girl replied that that was exactly the case. And besides, Wee Men-shin is a naive kid with no experience in the martial arts world. If used correctly, they would be able to learn more about the Flying Dragon Battle Hall and Jae Hyun's movements. But even she didn't expect that Yunseal and Vi Mechin would fall in love with each other. Mu said that people's hearts are unpredictable. But does Yang Jae Hyun know about their relationship? Hyang replied that no one but her knows, so how can he know? Mu replied that, in general, he understood everything. And now that he would start investigating everything, was there anything he should be careful about? Hyang was surprised and replied that it was the first time she had heard him say that. The guy said it was because he was no longer alone. People change, don't they? The girl told him not to forget that the Flying Dragon Battle Hall was a branch of the sect related by blood ties to the family, Sama. And yet it's the least notable sect of the 9. And if he touches them carelessly, it could get him in trouble with the main family, so let him be careful. Mu replied that he understood and would keep it in mind. Suddenly, Hyang remembered and said that he didn't know the geography of the area very well. And doesn't he need a guide? Mu replied that he had already found one, so there was no need to worry. The girl was curious and asked who it was. But the guy didn't answer anything and went straight out into the city. She recalled that simply proving that the promissory note was fake would not lead to a judgment. The ideal scenario is Yoon Jun-hai burning the promissory note with his own hands, and Jae-hyun giving up Yoonseal. But he realizes it won't be easy. When Mu entered the restaurant, he asked the waiter to bring him 1 teapot of oolong. The girl replied that it would be right away. Guy decided that for now he would focus on proving that the promissory note was fake. Suddenly, an unknown guest entered the restaurant and Mu said that coincidentally he was alone, so there was an empty seat next to him. And if she had nowhere else to go, why not have tea with him? The girl asked him in surprise. After all, she actually put a lot of effort into disguising herself. Mu replied that if Seo Lan said so, maybe she could at least put on a mask. Lan said that he speaks as if he knew she was coming. Mu replied that because he knows that Seo Lan's heart is unwaveringly loyal to him. Lan said she was amused and asked if he was too cocky. Mu asked in response, then why did the department head in the midst of her busy schedule come to see him? And why is she looking at him so intently? Lan replied that maybe then they would go to the inn immediately. Mu replied that it sounded good, but there was something he needed to do first. Lan said she thought so when he walked out of Suyong Pavilion. The guy replied that this time he was taking the case to solve it and he needed the information it was located, and as long as she tells him, she can take him around Loyang. Lan replied that it wasn't even funny, and she is an incredibly busy woman. But the guy said that if she didn't help him, she would suffer huge losses. Lan asked in surprise, what kind of losses? Mu replied that the reason why she stayed in Loyang for so long, and what she was looking for at Sun Ok Pavilion, and if she helped him, she could get a clue about it. Lan realized she was in a desperate situation and decided to speak up, but Lan asked, and how could she trust someone who lies as easily as he eats? Mu replied that Seo Ran should decide that. Suddenly raising his glass of tea after saying those words, he mentally destroyed the bottom of the mug out of anger. Lan was surprised and said he'd gotten even rougher since she'd last seen him. And maybe it would be quicker to get him to spill everything he knows, and have Mu tell her why she should leave his limbs intact. And while she waits for his answer, she will think of ways to play with him. Mu said no, and she would never do such a thing. Lan was surprised and asked him why. The boy replied that because Lan's feelings for him were unwavering. The girl realized he was right and frowned, but Lan couldn't stand it after that and started shouting that it was a masterpiece. Mu asked her, then what did it turn out to be? The girl replied that he was the only man who could make her laugh. She had already forgotten his shameless charm, and then she moved into the conversation and asked how she could help him. Mu replied that it's a long story, so don't let her not fall asleep in the middle of it. As she started talking, Lan listened and said that she knew Dok Sam well. He was quite famous among the underworld in Loyang, and that level of skill at forging documents is what anyone dreams of. 7 years ago, before his wife and kids were killed, he was very active. But after a family tragedy, he completely abandoned his work and drowned in alcohol. Eventually died of alcoholism. And while Gok Mandan had borrowed the money 4 years ago, there was no way Dok Sam could do anything about it. The girl replied that 5 years ago, Dok Sam had a severe tremor from alcohol withdrawal. He was in no condition to forge stamps, let alone sell simple stamps. Mu asked, then are there no other skillful counterfeiters in Loyang? The girl replied that not just in Loyang, but in the whole province, she could say with certainty that there were none. Mu thought and said that then only one possibility remained, that Dok himself had left a successor as skillful as himself. Lan told him that if he wanted to find a successor, there was a way. And if he tells her about the clue in Sun Ok, she will tell him everything. Mu asked, are they playing dirty? The girl replied that it was just an exchange of necessary information. Isn't that a fair exchange? Mu replied that he thought she was right. And then the darkest place under the lamp. The answer is not far off. Lan was surprised and asked him why he was suddenly like that. The guy replied that it was a clue he was giving her, let her think hard. But if Lan was giving, he should also receive in return. Lan replied, "That's right. There is a tomb raider named No Chul. He was a friend who took care of Doksam until his death. If there is a successor, he probably knows, so we need to find him." Mu asked, "Where can he find him?" Lan replied that if he helped her again, she would lead him to where he could find coal. And she's uncomfortable wearing these men's clothes, they're a little stifling. If he could help her change. Mu replied that if she had everything, of course he couldn't refuse her. After all this, he arrived at the place and said that it was the Loyang branch of the beggar sect. But suddenly seeing Luoyan still hugging him asked if she thought it was time for her to move away. Lan asked, "Why?" After all, he likes it too. Mu replied that he was working, so she shouldn't distract him. After finding the very spot, Mu asked, "So it's that person over there?" Lan replied that she had said so. "And that shaggy-haired guy Bugong, the 8th rank of the beggar sect. Does this guy know the whereabouts of Tomb Raider No Cole?" Mu asked. Lan replied that she did. Doksam, Bachul, and Bugong grew up in the same neighborhood and were close friends. They know each other better than anyone else. Mu said that if they catch this Bugong, they'll find out about both No Chul and Doksam. But the 8th rank of the beggar sect, there might be a problem with that. Is he afraid of dealing with a sect of beggars? The boy replied that it wasn't that it was easy to catch him, but not to make him talk. Lan smiled and said that torturing him to tell him everything was her specialty. Should she help? The girl asked. Mu replied that he didn't, and given that it was about his friends, he didn't think torture would work. Suddenly the boy thought and said he had a good idea. At that time, one of the beggars was walking around and was happy about his life. But in a moment he saw a very strange guy next to him. But after that he went out into the forest and started moving with great speed. The man opened the bush in front of him and said, "I finally found this sweet little thing. And how delicious it looks. And if it wasn't for the squad leader's urgent summons, she'd be in his stomach by now." But he wasn't left alone by the noise that came from the killing of several assassins from the bloody hall. Not unexpectedly, a stranger appeared and stole a piece of meat from his hands. It turned out to be Mu and told the man that he was disgusted with the block of meat he was eating. The man was shocked and asked who he was. Mu replied that he would like to ask him something, and put a piece of meat in his hands. But the man was rude and told the guy to get out of here. And he started running away from him. Mu said, as befits the 8th rank of the beggar sect, his escape tactics are impressive, but he still won't get far. The man entered the woods already and thought, who is this guy? And what is he even trying to do? But with his own eye, he saw the leaves from the trees begin to slowly fall, and he couldn't believe it. Mu used his powers to trap him. And the trap was Lan and her powers. The doe immediately pulled out her rope and throwing it around the man's neck immediately tied him up and held him. The man started to resist and the girl started saying that this damn pig had nothing but strength. Lanya started to panic and said she was fed up and told the guy to finish him off already. Mu replied that it was coming and immediately ran to attack. But the man saw this and threw his punch. Mu dodged his punch and was behind him. Without thinking long, he struck with all his might and knocked him out. Lan told the guy that just like he said, it wasn't hard to catch them. The guy replied that these people were from the beggar sect, always distracted by food. The girl asked him what he planned to do next. Mu replied that he would take him to a very scary place, and he wants him to be afraid of it and always run away as soon as he sees it. The girl said she's an expert at it, and this is the place she told him about. They tied the man up and put him in a chair so he could be comfortable too. Mu saw him open his eyes and kicked the chair and started yelling for him to wake up. The man was very frightened and asked who they were, and why are they doing this to him. Mu replied that here they are asking questions. It was in his interest to cooperate, and if he doesn't want to, all he'll have are his hands. And he doesn't hear him answering anymore. The man got scared and started screaming. The guy looked at it and after thinking about it said he should start with a couple of fractures. A man saw a log in front of him and asked for someone to help him. After all this, Moose started torturing and beating him. After getting information by night, he let him go and directed him to his neighborhood. The man was completely beaten up and there wasn't even a whole place left of him. But he was screaming that they were crazy. But Mu didn't leave him alone, and heading after him found himself right at the entrance to the village and immediately punched him from the elbow. The man was still screaming that they just took him and kidnapped him in broad daylight and then beat him like a mongrel. They took turns beating him. The man thought that if only he had failed to untie the rope on his hands, today would be his funeral. They let him go, and looking down from the rooftops, they could only hear the man screaming that he had been beaten up. Lan asked the boy if he had heard what the beggar had said. Mu replied that if heaven existed, he would have been punished long ago. The girl asked him to say how he guessed that if he was released, he would go to No Cheol instead of telling his superiors. Mu replied that there was something to thank Seo Lan for. The girl was surprised and asked to her. Mu replied that the beggar sect does not know No Cheol's location. But Gon, a close friend of his, knows very well and hides it from the sect. The girl asked him how he knew that. Mu replied that she was very similar to Duksama's crony, but he himself doesn't know where no Cheol is. And if the beggar sect knew Cheol's location, then everyone would know him, wouldn't they? Lan thought for a moment and replied that yes. And if he doesn't know something, then it means she can't get information from the 9 mystics of the lower world from the Loyang branch. And the sect's information is scrutinized by the 9 mystics of the lower world. And for that matter, the sect really doesn't know where Cheol is. Mu immediately remembered beating up a beggar some time ago and said that he had robbed the grave of his ancestor No Cheol 10 years ago, and where was he now? And after such a case, if someone targets No Cheol, Gong would immediately go and tell him rather than running to complain to the sect. Lan asked the guy if they would see where that guy went. Mu replied that he was at the Flying Dragon Martial Arts Hall. Mu thought for a moment and said it was already interesting. Lan turned around and told the boy that she thought he could do it without her. Mu asked, is she leaving him already? Lan replied that she didn't have time to do nonsense all day. Besides, she has a report to prepare. Mu didn't linger and thanked her for her help. Lan was surprised and asked him, just a thank you? Their work wasn't over yet after all. The guy decided to act and suggested that they have dinner together after he finished his business. The girl asked him if he was calling her to Suyeong Pavilion. She would have to look for him there. Mu replied that no and that it was not a good idea, he would not go there again. The girl was surprised and accepted it as it was. Lan said goodbye to him and walked off into the dark. And Mu looked at the sect and said that now he had to finish his business. Mu used his incredible abilities to infiltrate the sect and applied the stealth of a death god. The guy started in on the stalking and realized that beggars smelled pretty awful. But because of that, it would make it easier to track his target. Stopping above the house, he saw in the mirror Gon and the man who was next to him walk out the very same man. The beggar told the boy that this time he had not come for food. The boy was surprised and asked why then. The beggar replied that he had risked his life to warn him that very terrible men were after him, and let him see what they had done to him, and a worse fate awaited him. The guy turned out to be No Cheol. He asked with astonishment, was he being hunted by someone? The beggar replied that yes. And they are incredible martial artists, and asked Cheol if he remembered the grave that the guy robbed 10 years ago. One of his relatives had decided to take revenge on him. He heard that clearly. Cheol asked, and how is he supposed to remember something from long ago? The beggar replied that judging by that guy, that grave was obviously not a simple man. He had crossed the path of the wrong family. Cheol asked the man, where is the guarantee that he is not cheating him? He always comes to his house to steal money and food. The beggar told him to look at him. He came here risking his life, and now what does he get in return? And did Cheol realize that he was barely alive and had come to him instead of running away? Mu was standing next to the window at this moment, wondering how much longer he would have to listen to their stupid dialogue, and thought that maybe he should grab them both and beat them up. Suddenly Cheol moved into the conversation and asked how Duksama's child was doing. And now Mu has received information that Duksama's baby is here. And this is an unexpected turn for him. Cheol replied to the beggar that he was tired of telling him that it was no big deal. The beggar replied that he was still concerned that the girl would be alone among strangers. The guy told him that he fusses over anything, so here he is. Biren is a martial arts school from a side branch of the Heavenly Horse clan, known throughout the Murime. And the beggar thinks the head will let something happen to his student? Especially since he doesn't know that Hong-a is the daughter of Dway-sama, and he looks after her carefully, so there is no cause for concern. The beggar replied that it was good and he trusted only him, and they have to take care of Hong until he takes revenge on the man who killed his fiancée and made Duyek-sama a cripple. Cheol said that true to his word about catching the culprit, Chun-hai still hasn't found any evidence pointing to the culprit. The beggar couldn't help himself and slapped the guy and told him he was crazy and told him not to say anything. He never said that name, and in any case, let him be careful. The kidnappers are looking for him. Cheol replied that they should both be cautious. Suddenly the beggar said he was abruptly hungry for something, and did he have anything to chew on? Cheol replied that he knew the beggar would talk about food, and let him wait a little while, for they would bring him what was left in the kitchen. Mu decided to go too, as he had gotten a lot of interesting information. As expected, you need good bait to get the fish to bite. But he turned back into a spirit and went into the house. Cheol knocked on the door at that moment and asked if Hong-a was asleep. Hong-a was surprised and asked the gentleman what was being built at such and such an hour. Mu saw her face and realized that it was the same Hong-a, and she looks about 17-18 years old. And she looks like a beautiful woman. And he understands Pu Gong's concern. Cheol answered her to ignore it, and he just hopes she doesn't have any discomfort here. Hong-ah replied that it's fine, no need to worry. Mu stepped aside, for he had learned everything he needed to know anyway. And it was time to move on to the next stage. At this time, while Hua lay at home and rested to gain strength, the mercenary used his powers to break into the room. The mercenary said that kidnapping a child like that would be a piece of cake. He decided to give her an elixir to help her sleep a little longer. But suddenly, Hyang entered the room and saw that someone had burst into the room. The mercenary turned around and realized that he had been exposed. Mistress realized that a black rat had been caught from the back. She said there was a little rat. I guess their guards should be taught a lesson, they've gone off the deep end. The mercenary decided to get rid of her and attacked her, saying it was nothing personal. Mistress decided that there were no witnesses, she would handle him herself. She asked him at the moment of the attack, what was he trying to do? The mistress saw his sword and gathering her fan, she easily swung her arm and repelled his attack. Hyang said that for her, on the contrary, it was very personal, and immediately launched several attacks at the same time that even the mercenary couldn't handle them and flew out to the side. The mercenary realized that she was skilled in martial arts. But suddenly, someone behind him grabbed his head and covered his mouth with his hand. But without thinking long, it turned out to be Mistress. She used her speed and snapped his neck. Suddenly, Hua opened her eyes after sleeping, for some noise had woken her up a bit. But immediately she saw the body of a dead mercenary beneath her. Hua couldn't help herself and started screaming to the entire sect out of fear. The other mercenaries were outside saying that something had gone wrong, and the black rat had failed the mission. They decided not to take any more risks and immediately disappeared from sight before they were discovered. But far from leaving, halfway through they turned around and burst with 2 feet into the room, destroying the front door. The mercenary told the ally to be careful. After all, this woman killed a black rat. Her fighting ability is extraordinary. Just then, Mu appeared behind them and said that Hyang usually didn't look so intimidating. The mercenary turned around and asked him who he was. Mu immediately pulled out his fire blade and told the lady to cover Soso's eyes. Hyang heard and opened her fan and placed it right in front of the girl's eyes so she wouldn't see such a sight. Mu decided not to spare them and using his speed and fire sword, chopped them into small pieces. The mercenaries didn't even have time to make a few movements before Mu had already slipped his sword back into its holster. Hyang told him that skills cannot be wasted. Mu replied that it was true for her too. Soso turned to her uncle and was glad he had come. But Mu said there was a guy to save and they'd have to dig into his past. But he can't let anything go wrong. And he doesn't want anything to happen to Soso. Hyang smiled and told him that he was pretty good at playing in charge. And he knows he owes her, doesn't he? Her services cost money. Mu asked her to take care of a widower with a child, but the mistress replied that then she would just listen to the Great Flower's business and that would be the end of it. And by the way, is he just gonna leave the bodies in the little girl's room? Let her clean the place up a bit. Mu replied that she should leave it to Jean. At this time, the contractor was informed and told that the assignment had failed. And the black rat didn't live up to expectations. And the black rat had nothing that belonged to him, and even this child's abilities weren't enough to detect him. He was angry because he would have stayed in Shanghai, and why would he come all this way and bother him? And suddenly, the tenant thought and suggested use the people who had a grudge against him. Then he'll see if he can get to Siowa. Mu suddenly pulled out his knife and looked at the girl and said that maybe they would test Soso's abilities. The next morning, Mrs. Hyang decided to do a little grooming for Soso and began brushing her hair. Suddenly Mu came in and asked the girl if she had gotten some sleep. Soso answered her uncle that of course she had, but she had only had terrible dreams. Mu said understandably. And it's certainly not easy to sleep well after she's been through something like that. Soso let go of her head and thanked her uncle for saving her again. Mu replied that she should thank Madame Hyang instead. Hyang got angry after his words and asked who he was calling Madam. But Mu didn't pay any attention to her and told the girl that anyway if she needed to do something, here was her instrument to do it. And it was on the man who had tried to kidnap her last night. And let her now use her ability to read the memory of whoever was holding it. Soso took it and replied that she would try it now. Suddenly something indescribable began to happen, everything around her glowed and Soso was so fixated on the knife that her eyes swelled up. Soso began to see all of his memories and how all 3 mercenaries stood in front of her room and watched. Suddenly in the moment, Soso's energy evaporated and Mu saw her pass out and fall onto the bed. Hyang asked, "Is this baby going to be okay?" Mu replied that she was fine, just tired and that's all. Seeing Soso open her eyes, he asked her what she saw. Let her tell him. The girl answered that it was a secret sect and immediately closed her eyes again and fell asleep. Mu wasn't even surprised at her words and said that he suspected it. And as expected, that was what was affecting her body. Mistress told him that if he knew that, wasn't it necessary to test her like that? Mu replied that he still needed to confirm it, and they needed to figure out who these people were in order to plan further. Madam asked him with surprise, is he planning to storm the Chaos Sect? Mu replied that no, he would not do that. As long as Soso is here, they're not going anywhere, and they'll come after her again. And when they do, they will pay the price. Mistress was surprised and said he sounded so confident. But eventually, when he was gone, she would have to face them again, like this time. Mu looked at her and said that the head of the pavilion couldn't leave the little and poor girl, could he? The lady replied that she was about to start demanding his salary. The guy told her not to worry because he would work hard for her, so maybe she would spare him? Yang replied that of course. And that's the reason she hired him in the first place. Mu said that he would then complete his mission to begin with, and throwing the medicine into her hands told her to give it to the child after she woke up. Yang was shocked and asked, is that medicine? Mu replied that it was very expensive, and most of the deposit for this mission went to buy it. Yang was surprised and said that instead of saying expensive medicine like that, she thought being a little kinder to her would be more effective. And it's not easy for someone to change right away. After that, Mu went to the top floor and found Menshin working. He asked the guy if he was here. Menshin opened his eyes and replied that he was here, and asked the guy what brought him here? Mu replied that he had come to ask him something. Menshin asked him if he had made any progress in his investigation. Mu replied that sort of, but it's not specific enough to report on yet. Mu asked him, among his teacher's new students, is there a girl named Hong-ah? The boy was surprised and asked him how he knew. She had only joined a while ago, so rumors shouldn't have spread yet. Mu replied that he has his own abilities, and he wants to know about her. Her name, age, origin, and character. Menshin replied that her name was Hong-ah and 17 years old, and 7 years ago, her father, No Guang, entrusted her to a martial arts school. Wandering further into Jianghu. Hong-ah has a heart as beautiful as her looks, for which she has earned much love from both master and mastermind alike. And 3 months ago, she even became a named disciple of the master. And 3 months ago, he himself had become the master's anonymous disciple. And as far as he knows, there are no other special stories. Mu thanked him for the information, but Menshin asked him why he was so fascinated with Hong-ah. Mu replied that there were things in this world that were dangerous to know. Menshin understood and did not ask further, but thought that with the emotion and the obvious expression on his face and such a weak spirit, he'd better stay away from Jianghu for his own good. After that, Mu came to Su and said that he needed his help. Su got angry and asked him if he had lost his mind. Mu replied that the work is easy and the pay is good. His store looks like it's barely tying up loose ends. Su told the guy that if he was just here to salt his wounds, then let him get out of here immediately. Mu took out a sack and said that there were 10 silver coins in here. He just needs to do a very simple task and he will give them right away. Su grabbed the sack and replied that he would take the money first. But Mu told him that he was greedy but shallow on the outside. Su asked, and what is this simple task he is talking about? Mu replied to him to just give some information to the people he would point out. After this meeting, Mu headed to Jin's house. This place was considered to be the place where people enter with a sense of joy and leave in tears. And naturally, because it's an illegal gambling booth. Mu went inside and immediately entered another world where people bet all their money. Suddenly a girl came up to him and said that he must be new here, and what brings a distinguished guest to their house. Mu replied that he had come to place a bet of 10 silver coins on the dice. The girl told him that he looked like a very experienced guest and he was suitable for the middle table. As he walked by the rest of the players, he heard someone telling Commissioner Zhang that it looked like he was being defeated again. But the commissioner replied that today's happiness must belong to the hero Young. Mu looked at them and saw that a hero sitting and gambling in a beggar's gambling house is very funny. Suddenly, out of the blue, the girl slipped and he said that this table looks great. Walking over to the table, Mu immediately saw that Yang Ilching's eldest son, Yang Hansang, was sitting at the table. And now is the time to cast a rod, he thought. And he asked the players if he could join the game too. The player looked at Mu and said it should be interesting. And new participants are always welcome and can sit at the free chair. Mu looked at him and thanked him for being so kind. The player told him that he should start with money, so how much would the new player bet? Mu replied that this was his first time participating in this game, so he would start with that amount. He immediately put his money on the table. The player saw that kind of money and said he was a man of great ambition, and because he's a rookie, he'll give him a chance to take the lead. But can he say his name? Mu replied that he should call him Jean Daeheap. He realized that in a life full of ruins and games, Daeheap would die of cold. The reason they are here is part of his plan. And earlier, he spread rumors using Su to get through to him. And he told them that there would be a huge sin game at Jean Gajang's house tonight. He was also able to gather a lot of information from Lon. The relationship between the Jean Gajang house and the Flying Dragon Spear, and the fact that he, Yang Hansang, depends on games. But even someone like him, he's just a fishing rod to smelt the big fish. And now all that's left to fight is the fishing rod, and that's how the big fish will be caught. After already a few games, the players were very unhappy with his play as every move was his to win. One of the players just suddenly stood up and said she was out of the game. But Mu didn't stop and continued to make money. After a few games, another player already got up and said that he had had enough too. He had already lost. But suddenly two guys came up and one of them said that the game is getting more and more interesting. The second guy, not yet seated at the table, suggested that they raise the stakes as well. But Yang met them and said that the game had gotten so big, but now two great pieces adorned the table. The new players immediately sat down next to Yang. Mu smiled and thanked them for their participation as the atmosphere was heating up. Mu saw that the great figures, the great masters, the players were having a pleasant time. He immediately offered to take advantage of this intensity and end it with one game. Mu asked, what do they think about this? And slowly pushed all his hard-earned money to the center of the table. Mu saw their faces and asked, are they hesitant to make their move? In that case, he would give them the initiative. Yang couldn't resist and agreed and said he was already bored enough, and also suggested making this game big. The other players also saw that Yang went ahead. They followed him and bet all their money. Yang was the first to start playing with the stones and letting them loose on the table. He pulled out 2 stones with 11 points. Bale Sheik started shouting afterwards for them to make this game big and congratulations to Yang Hansang. Mu looked at him and saw that this guy was really becoming a laughingstock. And the other players had pulled out much less and had already lost their money. Mu took the stones in his hands and said then he was the last one to throw. And now everything would be decided. Everyone waited for the true moment while Mu spun the bowl of stones and had to pull out the result. Mu looked at their faces and said that he would check it out now. Picking up the bowl, Yang was shocked and couldn't believe his eyes. And when he saw 12 points on the stones, he realized that he had lost all his money. People were surprised and asked if it made sense. And it's a miracle, of course. They had never seen 12 points fall out before. Mu said he guessed his luck was just better. But Yang disagreed and started yelling that it was cheating. But Mu asked him, what is he talking about? After all, there's no cheating with dice. Yang turned to So Joe and said he thought it was time to close up store for the day. So Joe realized what Joe was talking about and went with the outlaws to Su's store in the evening after the game. They threw everyone out at once and said that the business at Jin Gajang's house was finished for today. Let everyone leave here immediately. Yang lost his temper and walked over to the guy and said that he picked the wrong person to joke with, and did he know who was standing in front of him? And in front of him stands Yang Hansang, famous for his iron-piercing spear in the martial arts world. Iron-piercing spear? But it's a pretty impressive nickname. And seeing that they use a spear with the last name Yang, he must be a descendant of a flying dragon. Even though it's an illegal gambling booth, trying to turn the game over by force is a little too low, doesn't he think so? Yang started yelling that he was planning to end it with his hand, but now the guy is hastening his death, and he would have to tear out his tongue for all the lies he had told. But Mu answered that he was sorry for his hand nor his tongue. Mu didn't play with them much and long as he suddenly punched both warriors and broke both of their arms. Mu told Yang that he would not give it to an ignorant bum like him. The warriors immediately started to fight, but Yang raised his hand and told them to stop. Mu asked the iron-piercing spear, what would he do now? Yang realized that this guy wasn't just a player without a goal. But suddenly the most important one walked in and asked what all the fuss was about. Mu was surprised in the moment and looked at him. The head said that it looked like an interesting game was developing. Didn't he? And then Mu rejoiced, for the big fish had been caught. Mu was actually waiting for Jin Junhai. After all, it was only for him that this was all planned. And he didn't come here to cheat Yang out of his money. He came here to target him, Master Dom Jin. Junhai said, could they please tell me what's going on here? Yang replied that this guy cheated in the game booth, but Mu said that he didn't know what Yang was talking about. That was just a happy thing. But Hai suggested that they should calm down first, and there's no point in arguing about what has already happened. Wouldn't it be better to settle it with fair play? And he'll join, too. That would guarantee fair play without cheating, wouldn't it? Yang realized that it was like this, and if Master Dom Jin joined, there was no room for cheating. And what's more, this would be an exceptionally big game. Yang relented and said that it was very good, and he agreed. But Mu replied that judging from the atmosphere, he must be someone very important here. After all, a real gambler wouldn't refuse to up the ante, would he? He's using this game to prove his innocence. Hai sat down at the table and apologized to them. But Mu suggested that they settle it with this game, and he would bid 1,250 silver taels. Yang asked, altogether again? Is he really that sure? Yang appealed to the great hero Jin that he didn't have enough money. And could he lend him the age-old promise? He replied that there was no problem with that, but Mu also said that he is not against age-old promises, but they must be from a reliable source. And century pledges must be from one of the 3 major financial institutions. He said it is convenient. In Jin Manor, they only accept century pledges from the main branch of Taihua Financial Hall, one of the 3 main institutions. And it will also use century pledges. Mu took the stones in his hands and said that there were 3,750 taels in total. This is a suitable amount for the final game. And asked who would go first. After a good game, a girl came and told Mu that he had received 3,700 taels in century pledges and 50 taels in silver. Mu took his winnings and said that this game was very satisfying. But Yang asked the great hero Jin if he was sure it was okay to let him go like that. He replied that he knows some martial arts. If Yang treats him carelessly, it will only lead to unnecessary problems. And in any case, the only money this guy will walk away with is 50 silver taels. However, if he were to carry a century-old promise to the Taihua Finance Hall, that would be problematic. Yang replied that he was aware of it. If he headed to Taihua Finance Hall, he would personally take care of it, and someone who dared to insult him cannot stay alive. In the morning, Mu came to Hyang and said that it was a century-old promise from Taihua Financial Hall issued by Jin Manor. Hyang asked with surprise, an age-old promise? And 3,700 silver taels? But that's a very huge amount of money. Mu asked, so what of it? Hyang asked with surprise, fake? Mu replied that he confirmed it from Su on the way here. But Madam said it doesn't make sense. The seal is identical to the seal of the Taihua Finance Hall. No way she could recognize the false age-old promise. Mu asked her, doesn't this level of exact fake remind her of someone? Madam asked, could it really be Seal? Mu replied that that was exactly what it was. With such advanced forging skills, even Seal couldn't tell that his father's seal was fake. Madam said that the person who falsified the seal of the Gok Marshall family also created this age-old promise. Mu responded that it was correct. This is a complication of most of the case. And it was time to wrap it up. Mu asked her why she was making that face. Mistress replied that it was just that it was all really necessary. She wondered if he was asking for something unrealistic. Mu replied to Mistress that she even says such soft things. Is she afraid for him? Mistress said no, and that's not true at all, but sighing anyway, then let him follow Yazen's steps. Mu replied that everything was already done. And now all that was left was to complete it. The lady asked him, is he going to the Taihua Finance Hall? Mu replied that no, going there would be boring, so he heads to the Flying Dragon Battle Manor instead. After all, that would be a better plan. Su received the letter and said that it was not difficult to deliver it. But why does he need this person? Is it really for this? Mu replied that it's all part of a bigger plan. He's only counting on him. And when he thinks about it, he thought Su wants to know, so he'll tell him. Su said that regarding Madame Wu of Song OK Pavilion, who was tied up in the murder case he solved, it seems her whereabouts have been unclear recently. Mu replied that he understood and was grateful for the information. But Su thought that this guy either already knew that Chang Yun was missing, or at least he expected it. But anyway, it's none of his business. And he decided that he'd hurry up and finish his work here. Suddenly, a girl came up to him and asked him that someone had said they had business with her. Su replied that someone had asked him to deliver it to her. And then he placed a sealed letter in her hands. At the end, Su said that he did as he was told. He doesn't know what problems she is planning, but if she made any trouble, this Nan Rang would not let her go easily. And told Muang to make sure she doesn't overdo it. The next day, Mu walked around and said right, he didn't lie. He just didn't say anything, so he didn't deceive Nan Hyang. But if she found out, that pipe would hit him over the head, but would asking for forgiveness be enough? But suddenly, Yang and Chief he came up behind him and told the guy that he was pondering whether to go to Su Hyang Pavilion. But he had come here himself, so he was grateful to him for that. Mu was surprised, for that was exactly what he was going to say. And so far he's followed the plan so well that he can't thank him enough. After all this, one of the guys came to his clan. The man met his brother-in-law and said that he never dreamed that he would visit them so unexpectedly. Shiren said he came to Loyang to investigate the Song Okta incident. He just came to visit his brother-in-law's military office. The man replied that he understood into the Flying Dragon Battle Manor. He wasn't fully prepared because it came so suddenly, and if she'd sent the message in advance, he would have given him a copy. And asked Shiren if he was looking for something. The brother-in-law replied that no. He is a rude, tactless bottom who doesn't care about standards of behavior. Didn't he forget anything here? Mu stood up against them and said that it seemed that at the same time they were both thinking the same thing as himself. Yang asked what was he even saying? Mu asked him back, wasn't he planning on making another big fuss? Maybe they would let him join in. Yang couldn't help himself and started laughing loudly. and said that with such skills and he was unconcerned about the pranks of the world. But Yang told Jin that there was no time for petty talk. If he wants to leave alive, have him give up the token from the Taiwan money house. But Mu turned around and sensing the warriors attacking him asked, "Have they ever seen such a disgraceful man?" Yang shouted, "How shameful of her. In the martial world, the worst things come all the time." It was his naive nature that was the problem, and immediately ordered them to attack. The warriors straight all attacked him with their weapons, but Mu wasn't scared of anything and just started fighting them out of strength. But the warriors were shocked and didn't even expect him to turn out to be such a good master. Mu was so good that they couldn't even see where the punch would come at them from. And lastly, Mu threw a two-legged punch right at Yang's head to make him answer for his words as well. Mu jumped over him and said he may be naive, but he's confident in his feat. Yang was shocked after this and ordered his warriors to immediately catch him and finish him off. Mu saw that they were still continuing to pursue him and in a moment jumped into the air to strike. Yang shouted that crazy guy is heading to the martial arts hall with a flying dragon, and let them catch him before his father notices. Mu was still running and thinking, where could he be? He must have gotten his letter, and he would be here to break his neck. As he entered the clan, he saw a very familiar man, and immediately stopped for a few moments. Mu didn't waste any time and yelled to the guy that he was here, and immediately introduced himself and said his name. The guy was a little surprised and was shocked. And Mu tried to walk forward and suddenly the guard immediately stopped him. Did the guards ask who this guy was? Can't he just stand there? But Shuren couldn't help himself and ordered them to stop. Mu said that his inertia previously remains the same, but did he really become even stronger? Standing against each other, Mu told the guy that he was afraid the guy wouldn't show up after so called him out. The guy replied that this was a shameless attitude and he really hadn't changed. The man also asked Shuren if he knew him. The brother-in-law said yes, and it was someone he had had brief contact with in the past. Mu asked, a brief contact? And how disappointing between the two of them. But the guy got angry and said he should be quiet for a while. But suddenly Yang came in and saw this and thought, what's going on here? And why is his uncle in a martial arts hall with a flying dragon? And why is this guy acting so familiar with his uncle? Mu asked him if he was still angry about the situation. The guy replied that if he didn't shut his mouth, he would slit his throat right now. The man turned to Shuren and asked him to calm down for a moment. The guy realized the mistake and replied that he apologized. Man didn't really know what was going on here at this point, and it seems to have something to do with that stupid son. And frankly, he'd like to kill him and shut the whole thing up before it gets noisy. But since his son-in-law has a connection to him, he can't do anything about it now. The man asked, what exactly is going on here? Why are they making such a ruckus? Mu bowed and replied that he apologized. Mu introduced himself and said that he was a security guard working at Seinen Pavilion, and he had long heard about Director Yang's valor, his chivalrous spirit and unquenchable sense of justice. And he sincerely apologizes for jumping the walls of his martial arts gym without his permission. However, there's a reason he had no choice but to do it. Unfortunately, his son, young master Yang's young master, had created an entanglement with Jin, the master of that illegal gambling establishment there. And this was done in order to spread a large number of fake tokens throughout Loyang. Yang was shocked after hearing him say that and asked what was he even talking about? The man realized it was his stupid son again. And of all things, should he have gotten caught up in his dealings with Jinha? But the Flying Dragon Martial Arts Hall was the most insignificant among the 10 branches of the Sima clan sect, and the only reason such a low starting sect changed their wealth was because they secretly supported Jin, who was in the business of lending and gambling in exchange for receiving bribes from the NYU. But he realized that there was no way the core family would tolerate such illegal activities, and if his brother-in-law found out about it, he'd report it to the family's chief disciplinary committee. And now he had to do something to divert his attention. The head turned to his brother-in-law and said that he apologized for dragging him into this sect, and offered to come inside. The guy replied that no, and the sooner they resolve the issue, the better. And besides, while that man may be trash, he's not the one telling lies. The head said that he understood, and let the guard Mu continue about what he was talking about. Mu replied that he would then explain in detail. Mu said that at Jin Manor he participated in a fair and just bet with young Master Yang and Master Jin, and he exchanged the silver he won in the game for promissory notes. However, when he showed these promissory notes to an acquaintance who was well-versed in valuation, he told him that the promissory notes were counterfeit and were currently circling Loyang. And so he came to the Flying Dragon Martial Arts Hall to defend his hatred in front of the Lord Magistrate, but young Master Yang and Master Jin were already waiting for him with a group of men. And the next thing, he was so horrible he had no choice but to climb the wall of the Flying Dragon Martial Arts Hall to save his life. Brother-in-law thought it was funny, tormented Jin Mu, afraid of a group of worthless people like them. The head asked his son everything the boy said. Yang was very frightened and replied that no, and it was all lies, and let his father trust him. The brother-in-law asked, then why was he there with those men? The head turned to Master Jin and said that he didn't know they had such close ties to Hansang. And is the guard telling the truth, he asked. When Jin saw the look in the head's eyes, he realized that he was telling him to take the blame. He immediately fell to his knees and begged the master to forgive him. And it's his fault, he was blind with greed and he did it. And the foreman didn't know anything and was just trying to help him, and now he was asking the master to let the blame fall on him alone. Mu watched this spectacle and saw that it wasn't really him or this Yang he was looking for, and in fact, now his real target is Head Yang. It was all his fault and it was his idea. The people standing around saw all of this and asked, what spawned Jin to do such a thing? And it looks like the Count Master did something. Someone in the crowd asked, is that man really COM? But suddenly a girl came up to them and said, what is going on? Count Master saw that his soul was relieved and he could attribute all the blame on Jin. He told Master Mu that Jin seemed to be apologizing and confessed everything. But although it is shown that Hansang didn't fully understand the situation, as the head of the Flying Dragon Martial Arts Hall and as a father, he can't just let it pass. And so he listens to the opinion of the victim, Guardian Jin. And how does Mr. Mu wish to resolve this? And he understood that they could settle it with fair compensation and money. The guy thought his brother-in-law might think that, but they didn't start this fuss just to get their money back. What's Mu trying to accomplish? Mu said he was really impressed with their fair handling of the situation. If he would close the compensation for the loss and assure him that it would not happen again, that would be enough for him. The Count replied that he understood and would return his silver money. But Mu said that this is not all. Since they cheated in the game house, corresponding to the traditional punishment, Master Jin and young Master Yang should have their wrists chopped off. Yang got really scared and asked, what is this jerk saying? And who is he talking about that needs his wrists chopped off? But Mu shouted that he still hadn't finished speaking. But all of a sudden Shuren suddenly started running after the fugitives and passed beside him like lightning. The fellow caught up with them both and told them that by fleeing meant they were admitting their guilt, and immediately ordered them to return to their places, for he will listen to the guard's report and decide their fate. And if they refuse, he will finish them here and now. The man replied that it was okay, and no matter what happened, he would protect her. Mu thanked the guy and said he was afraid he might kill him on the spot. The guy replied that it was a branch of the Sama family, his brother-in-law's military office. He just didn't want bloodshed by moving the truth. And if it turns out that he has falsely accused someone, he will first take his hand. Mu replied to keep this in his mind. And further Guy said that he could continue to listen to what Guard Jin was saying. He realized that if it wasn't for his brother-in-law, he would have just killed that Guard Jin and been done with it. Guy told the security guard Jin to continue. Mu proceeded with his story and said that the truth was that he was in the process of investigating after receiving the request, and the client was given a promissory note for a debt that was supposedly owed by their father that they had no knowledge of, and he was forced to pay it back. And the person who brought that promissory note was none other than Master Jin over there. And that promissory note was a high-quality forgery, and he was investigating to identify the forger and prove that his client's debt was unfair. He came upon someone named Doxum, a notorious counterfeiter in Loyang, and since he was one of the few who had the skills to create such a flawless forgery. However, he found out that Doxum had lost his family to those who had a grudge against him, fell into despair, drowned in alcohol, and passed away a few years ago. And then he found and questioned a beggar named Gon, who claimed to be a longtime friend of the Doxum and revealed the full story of the case. And No Chul, who is with him now, was once an old friend of Doxum's, and he was hiding Doxum's secret child, No Hong, or more precisely Yu Yenhong, in the martial arts hall Flying Dragon for protection. The girl herself realized what this was all about and was greatly frightened. And since Doxum never took on an apprentice, the only one who could inherit his sophisticated forging skills was his own child, Yu Yenhong. And afterward, Jin Jin used his connections with young hero Yang to make contact with Yu in the Flying Dragon Martial Arts Hall, and made him forge promissory notes, which were then distributed in Loyang. Of course, the forged promissory note his client received was among them. The warrior immediately ordered his men to examine Yenhong's room. The servants replied that they would do so right away. The servants found something and let the chief know, and they said it was hidden in Yunhong's room. The tools used for the crafting, along with transaction records from various exchangers in Loyang. And there's also more promissory notes and seals. Guy asked son-in-law if the Flying Dragon Martial Arts Hall was in any way involved in Master Jin's crimes. The Count thought that if the main family found out that their martial arts hall was making money through illegal transactions in collusion with Master Jin, they would be finished. But whatever happens, he must cut ties with Master Jin. Mu said that, of course, a great hero like Master Jin of Loyang Hall would never conspire with lowly scoundrels to profit from illicit affairs. And since Hall Master Yang should also be uncomfortable being involved in such matters, it was best for both parties to wrap this up quickly. The Count thought that if he agreed, he would let it be presented as if Master Jin acted alone. This arrogant brothel guard dares. The Count asked what guard Jin wanted to do. Mu replied that his demands remain unchanged. The silver must be returned. The hands of those behind the forgeries must be chopped off as punishment. Master Jin should burn the promissory note from the martial arts hall grain right in front of his eyes. But suddenly someone asked him, what did he just say? Mu recalled and said that he would appreciate it if the hall master refrained from visiting the Suyang Pavilion from now on. It would have been quite embarrassing to see them there in a professional capacity. The Count got angry and started yelling at Mu and saying that he was all about that woman from the beginning. The warrior asked son-in-law what he meant by the word woman. The Count replied that no, it was accidental. The Count thought and realized that this guy had been working at HVF's request from the beginning. But if they present it as Master Jin's crime alone, like he said, the Count said he was getting too excited. As he said, the best way to settle the matter was this way. Mu immediately thought and saw that it was absolutely right. He has no choice but to agree. The player disagreed and asked Master Yang to wait, and he too was falsely accused. The head turned around and looking at him with his gaze, the player was immediately startled and froze in place. The warrior pulled out his blade and said that now that the truth was revealed, it was time to fulfill the punishment. The player started shouting and telling the young hero Yang to help him. But the warrior took advantage of this moment and cut off his hand. The Count told his son-in-law that he need not get to that point. The warrior replied that these men had lowered the family's honor into the mud, and if it were up to him, he would cut off their heads, but out of respect for his son-in-law, he will limit himself to chopping off his wrist. Cheol started screaming that he was wrong. He really was wrong, and asking them to spare Hong at least. But the warrior was about them a ruthless man, and coming close at once cut off his arm. But after that he decided to move on to the girl and told Cheol that if he interfered he would lose his head. The warrior approached the girl and told her to pay the price for her family's shame. He immediately drew his sword to cut off her arm. The girl realized she was going to lose her hand and closed her eyes in fear. But Mu didn't let him do that and stopped his attack. Mu said he apologized and suggested to Hui that he would stop there. Hui didn't expect this and was shocked.